So, um, there are, I'm seeing news headlines about Bitcoin ETF, Ethereum ETF, and so on. And I've only got kind of a fuzzy understanding of what that really means. As best I understand it, it's something like I can buy a contract that represents my claim to X number of whatevers. I mean, which is, I guess, how the gold ETF market works. They're not, they seem to not often be
So
expecting that I would ever accept the delivery of
first
the
things
gold, right?
first, what's an ETF? An
Yeah, yeah,
ETF
that's
is
what
an
I'm going to ask.
exchange traded fund. So essentially, it's a fund that let's say, for example, the really well-known ones that actually just about every person's self-directed pension or RIA in the States, you have registered investment advisors. The things they'll push you into over and over again will be ETFs, um, because actually they're very, very efficient. They track the performance of the whole portfolio. It gives you good portfolio management, risk balancing, etc. That's the idea. So let's say the S&P 500. Okay, so the people who run highly efficient ETFs are the ones who can best mimic the performance of the S&P 500 as a whole and reduce as far as possible the inefficiencies of somebody trying to track that, because obviously it weights differently as it moves along. So let's say the S&P 500 makes a 5% gain this year, okay?
Mhm.
Your ETF is probably going to track that at around 4.5% before fees. The 0.5% is going to be a handbrake that comes from all of the aspects that go on within the fund in order to facilitate that tracking. So it's not free to buy and sell shares. It's not free to operate any of the things that allow you to correctly mimic how the S&P 500 is operating. So there's always going to be a degree of loss, much like we talk about the loss of power between an engine, a gearbox, and the wheel. Okay,
Okay. So,
that
so
transmission
this F
failure
is
occurs.
this F is fund as in if I were to have heard the term index fund, I would have expected something that tracks the S&P 500.
Correct.
ET, what was the
And
ET again?
exchange traded. So what's happening
Okay.
here is rather than me, the market maker, sorry, me, the asset manager making a market, instead I place these instruments, these contracts onto an exchange where every registered investment advisor in the USA, for example, can direct their clients into them. And that's actually a massive, massive audience. There's over 60,000 registered investment advisors in the States, and they're the people who do pension planning, estate planning, etc., for high net worth individuals, people with probably more than $1 million of liquid wealth. The kind of people who can have self-directed investments, etc., within the US system. And you see the same thing replicated in every country. Every country has got its version of a registered investment advisor.
Okay. So, all right. So that
And
that
just to be
means that
clear, an ETF is a very, very nice packaged product for such people to sell to their clients. It really obviates any responsibility on their part in a way because it's like, well, I wasn't the stock picker. It's just what the S&P 500 did this year. And
right.
it actually feeds back to something that had me marked as a bold boy in the asset management industry because many years ago I was part of a group who used pseudonyms to talk about what was really happening in financial markets. And one of the things that I called out, which as an asset manager at the time was a bold boy thing to do, but I lived the truth of what I said. Um, so what I said at the time was, look, this 2 and 20 business just doesn't work. 2 and 20 is we charge 2% of the portfolio as a management fee and 20% of the upside as a performance fee. It's not aligned with your investor at all because you're getting 2%
Wow.
whether you're useless or brilliant.
Hmm.
Now, what actually transpires from this, and they used to do this, they used to give a monkey 10 darts and have the monkey throw the darts at a dartboard that contained the S&P, sorry, the Dow Jones Industrial Average 30, the top 30 stocks in America. And it's basically a joke example of random walk theory at work. Because the monkey doesn't know what it's firing the darts at, right? It's just throwing darts at a board. So it ends up with this equally weighted portfolio of 10 stocks. And The scary thing is those random walk theory monkey selected portfolios perform better than 60 to 80% of US investment advisors.
That, yeah.
Okay, so exchange traded funds really took off as a means of saying, hey, I'm not the stock picker, I'm just this guy over here who's doing this. And it also allows the whole industry to peck fees out of the system. So the people who run the actual exchange traded fund are picking up 2 and 20. So remember I said if the S&P 500 has a 5% net return on the year, then actually the ETF might only be about 4.5 because of what you would call transmission losses
Hmm.
to mimic the system. And that's before fees. Then there's a 2 and 20 leveraged on top. So 2% of whatever you put in comes out and goes to the management company. And 20% of the 4.5% is deducted. So 0.9, you're now down to 3.6% return, minus the 2% on the money that you put in the first place. So actually, you're probably flat.
We should get back to the business. We're doing it wrong. This is like we're doing hard things. That sounds way
Yeah,
easier.
well, the problem you have is your CEO is the guy who called this out when he was in that industry and said it was wrong.
Yeah, but seriously though, like this is one of those things where even if I was engaged in that, and I think this is probably similar to like when you see something dumb, you kind of just have to say it because it's like this is there's no way this is going to go on forever. So that means we're kind of in a pre-sinking ship.
Yep.
So you should call it out and let's okay, so this was cool for a while. Now everyone's doing it and the fees this is ridiculous. So we're in a pre-sinking ship. Where are we going next? Would be the natural question I would want to ask anybody I was working with, but they may see that as an attack on the system
Yeah.
as
And
opposed to
actually,
like,
exactly to your point, what I was really trying to do back then was call out that, hey, this is not a viable industry. This is not a viable business. Things are going to change. And we need to change before they change, before it's changed for us.
yeah, exactly. It's
Um,
kind of the World War III is going to happen whether we want to or not. Well, the calculus is let's be the one to trigger it so we know when it's going to happen instead of letting it happen to us. Which
that's an extreme
that's
version, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
it's that principle of be the initiator rather than get initiated on.
so look, this whole industry is a series of people dining out of the trough. Okay. And the nearer you are to where the feed went into the trough, the more likely you work for one of the very big banks in the investment banking arm. And it all processes down the chain until you
Ooh,
get to the poor people who are investing through their registered investment advisors and buying these ETFs, buying these things. Now, there's legitimacy to the ETFs in that they are genuinely being tracked on how well they manage those transmission failures between the performance of the index versus the performance of the specific fund. And the better they perform those roles, the more allocation they'll get, the bigger they'll get. And then they have another problem which comes into play, which is being able to manage the liquidity that a very big fund would have in the market in that way. That's a whole other kettle of fish. The point is, what you have when you issue an ETF is an extraordinarily well-oiled machine for the distribution of that product into everybody's portfolio. And this is exactly what the Bitcoin ETF was about, and it's what the Ethereum ETF is about. And there are two big fundamental issues I have with it. The first is that Bitcoin is a proof of concept, as
mhm,
is Ethereum. It's a proof of concept. Both of
mhm.
them amount to being square wheels on the axle of a cart. And until we remove those square wheels and put circles in their place, circular wheels, it's just not going to work. So, what are we really seeing happening? And this is the second big issue I have with it. It's about scaling the bag holding approach that fundamentally underpins the entire crypto industry. When crypto VCs ask you, how big is your community? What are they asking you? They're not asking you how many people are buying your product, actively using your product. They're asking you how big is the collection of bag holders you've assembled that we can dump this rubbish on when we've got maximum FOMO underway. Because our money is not going to build a product. You could build a product for 50,000 tops for most of what these people are offering. And that's 50,000 if you were using very highly paid engineers and consultants the whole way through. If you were scraping this together, as most of them are, out of programmers that you've just picked up on the equivalent of Fiverr, or just copied and pasted existing tech, which you know very well is one of the diseases that perpetuates throughout this industry.
We're trying to chat GPT it, and now
Oh
nobody
yeah,
knows what do you think
100%.
that's?
You know, let's just give Chat GPT $20 and get a whole crypto project out of the door. Okay. So what is the money that's being contributed paying for? It's paying for marketing. It's paying for some of the slickest, most
It is slick, to be fair.
it is. I mean, I read a white paper from one of the big blockchain guys who's making huge headway in the banking sector right now on a FOMO basis with the bank, saying, "Hey, you know, you need to be on our team because if you're not on our team, you're not going to be getting the nice ticks in your boxes for marketing." And it's a marketing exercise.
That's
Um,
almost a with us or against us kind of like,
oh,
rhetorical
it is.
play.
It's pure FOMO, and you know what they basically said is, okay, so we're a blockchain. Okay, we're a blockchain. Good, good. Next. Um, and we are a node in every one of our client chains. Oh, okay. Um,
Yeah,
so
you should automatically go, what is that? Hmm?
yeah, yeah. Uh, okay, I'm good. No, I'm not. No, no, that doesn't make sense. All right, so tell me again. You're a regulated entity because you're a central counterparty in a traditional financial market infrastructure context, aren't you? God, no, we're a blockchain. No, no, you're one or the other. Decide. Okay, but look, let's put that to rest. That's a whole other day's conversation. The point is, what this industry has become phenomenal at is FOMO marketing. What it has been a complete failure at for at least 8 years is actually innovating and doing anything interesting. So,
Oh, okay. I gotta stop you. Okay, so from what you're telling me, an ETF that represents Bitcoin or Ethereum would be a way for me to basically buy a claim to Ethereum or Bitcoin through a proxy that's tracking their performance, which there'll be some service fee or whatever. There's some fees involved in this, of course, but um, why
oh,
would I
no, no,
not?
no. There's a lot of fees involved in this. Let's be very clear.
Okay,
In order
well,
to have the pleasure of being fleeced in a FOMO deal, we're going to leverage the fees like you have never seen before. They're going to be eye-watering. Anyway, go on.
oh well, I mean, at least the handcuffs have velvet on them, but
Absolutely.
it makes me wonder what's the advantage of that. Okay, basically what exchanges are doing right now, the crypto exchanges, is providing the same type service where,
No. Okay, so let's make the differentiation.
yeah,
So,
I need to get the difference.
firstly, they're not exchanges. Full stop.
Hmm.
They are single-sided market makers making a book on screen. That's what
Right,
they are. Okay.
right,
An
right. So literally,
exchange
if I
is a
buy, if
multilateral trading facility. On Coinbase,
Mhm.
it's Coinbase's trading facility. That
Yeah,
is
so I give them
not the
my
same thing.
crypto,
It's
I give them my
unilateral.
fiat, and they've got my crypto. And if I want to move that crypto on chain in my name to my actual wallet on chain, they're gonna just skin me. Like the fee for doing that's insane. So the ideal for them
The
is
fee
that
for
I
doing
give
that
them
is
my money.
insane because how
They
dare you do
allocate
that
me,
thing?
yeah, they allocate me a claim, the crypto that they actually have, that they
Mhm.
could, in theory, put on chain in my name, but almost nobody ever really does that.
Uh, Another day, we're going to talk about the delights and entertainment of rehypothecation, which is where your actual crypto that you gave them on custody is lent out to other people without your knowledge
Oh
or
yeah, yeah.
consent.
There's something in here where, and FTX is doing this big time, but a lot of them are doing it, and it's happening on layer twos now, where they've almost like reinvented fractional reserve banking without calling it that.
Yep.
and there's some sneaky business going on.
It's called rehypothecation, and essentially it's a form of fractional banking.
It's
Exactly
such
as
a,
it's always great talking with you because you identify the reality so quickly. It's fractional banking for assets.
I love that term though, dude. Rehypothecate.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
really
look,
cool
the
term.
crypto world didn't learn how to apply very long words that most people don't understand to things to sound smart and get you to buy it without questioning what it is
Dude,
from nothing.
let me
They got it
let
from
me try to pick this apart though. This is so cool. Not hypothecation, because okay, let's shut the re off.
what does
Hypothecation.
hypothecation mean?
Hypothetically, I'm conjecturing something. I'm
Okay.
so
So
I'm
let's get to a nugget point here.
uh,
Every asset is hypothecated in the existing financial system. So,
okay.
okay, the
In
money,
that it's a hypothetical asset that's pointing to a real one somewhere.
yes, which sits
It's
with the Central
tokenized, sort
Security
of.
Depository. So the CSD, Central Security Depository in the US, is called the Depository Trust, the DTCC, Depository Trust Clearing Company.
You know, so many acronyms, dude. This is
Um,
ridiculous.
and yeah, I keep slipping on that one though. And they actually have about $4 to $6 trillion a year of throughput on the clearing side because every single
How's there that
share,
much money? Jesus.
because all the shares in America that, on the NASDAQ, the NYSE, the ASE, all of them, they are all, they get the actual share certificates in their origin form sit with the DTCC. And the DTCC basically says to the custodial bank, okay, so you have a relationship with us. We will give you this balance sheet saying that you have so many of these. And essentially, the entire system is basically trying to track back to that point and back up again to the exchange and the transaction itself all the time. That's why it's such a complex mess. But we could do a whole other series of videos on this because it's really entertaining stuff.
Oh, this is I sorry, I just did a search. Yeah, that's nuts.
Right, so
I'm gonna look into that later.
rehypothecation is where you take something you've hypothecated and you reissue it all over again. It's okay. So, what is money? Go back to your example of fractional banking. What is money? Money today is no longer a layer two for gold.
Hmm.
Uh, it's now a fiat thing. It's a thing because I say it's a thing. And how dare
Hmm.
you question me otherwise, right? It's a bit like
Right.
when one of your children says, you tell your children to do something and say, but daddy, you do that. And you go, yeah, do as I say, not as I do, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like that. It's like, listen, I know the emperor's naked, but how dare you say so? So, um, this is
Every
exactly
now
what's
and then,
happening.
executive privilege sneaks in.
Yeah, but this is basically executive privilege on a global scale from global institutions to us, the poor plebs, whose job it is just to carry the risk.
Well, okay,
So
but to extend the metaphor though, because there is actually a hard point to this. The hard edge of reality comes in when your kid says, "But you do that," and you got to think sometimes. Okay, either I gotta relax a rule, or I need to start. I actually got to buckle down on myself some. And you actually have to take that into advisement, though. Sometimes a kid tells you exactly how you're screwed up, and
yeah, but
and they'll just say it too. There's no filter.
yeah, but you're getting into the realms of responsible parenting here. The whole point of how the existing system and the system that the crypto bros would like you to have is that it's not responsible parenting.
Right, yeah, and that's
Um,
my point is that this divorce of responsibility from everything is kind of a trend. It's a theme within the new whatever
Yeah. So
the new
talk
thing that's
I
being
talk
offered
about the
is.
existing financial system privatizes profit and socializes risk. But to your point you're making right now, actually what it really does is it abrogates responsibility.
Hmm.
It allows you to say, do as I say, not as I do. You know, try being a guy walking into a bank saying, "Hey, you know what? I lent loads of money to my friend, so I can't pay my mortgage now. How about you give me a write down?" Try saying that. But that's basically what the bank said to the American people, the people in Europe, the British people, etc., around the world in 2009, and they said it again last year in America.
But they said it in a fancy way,
Yeah, but
so it's
that's
cool.
that's the key. You have to put on a nice suit, nice tie,
You have to
you
say
know.
something like rehypothecation.
That's right. You need to use long words, and you need to use lots of them in as dense a way as
Oh,
possible. And so, like I say,
wow.
the crypto world didn't lick this off a stone. Okay. All the same people that were really good at selling Ponzi schemes in the traditional system ended up selling Ponzi schemes in the crypto system.
So okay, so wait, that hypothesizes that um people doing wacko bundle assets that were kind of impenetrable to understand
Oh,
in 2000
stop. You
before
do
2008.
understand that the entire financial crisis was driven by wacko bundled
Oh yeah, yeah.
assets.
Yeah, so like the pre-2008 milieu combined with the same thing that was going on at an even bigger scale. People are like American economic contagion without mentioning the carry trade in East Europe at all. And then the war from Russia that triggered the 2 week reassessment. Oh crap, war actually exists now. And then unwinding all that crap. Right. But it's an American contagion. It's like, dude, this is a bigger problem than like just America. There's a systemic holy crap. And let's mention Chinese junk bonds. No, like this whole like the level of fakeness is insane. Every airline is a bank now that just incidentally does flights sometimes
Hey,
because
just
that's how
stop
they
being
maintain their
GM and
essential
Ford.
status.
GM and Ford stopped being car manufacturers 30 years ago. They became
Dude.
pension funds.
Yeah, yeah. Like this is everybody wants to be a bank now. I mean, everybody. And but nobody wants to make like stuff. And if everyone stops making stuff, we're not gonna have any stuff. Um, which kind of
As if the World Bank gets their way, everybody stops making food, apart from people in countries that can't make enough to feed themselves.
which kind of makes me wonder, okay. So just from kind of a mechanistic point of view here, um, if I don't have any more batteries to run my things all stop working. Now those are just things,
Uh-huh.
not too big of a deal. But if I stop having enough batteries to make my kids function, we're gonna have like a problem. Um, so the it was more fun. It was so much more fun to discuss things like that back when like Alex Jones was obviously wrong about everything. Mm, it's crazy. Like this is ridiculous.
The thing of it is, so you've mentioned this thing about Alex Jones being obviously wrong a few times,
Mhm.
um, because that's what most people thought back then.
Yeah, but my Alex Jones is right jar is
The,
getting
the,
full. And it's
the
like,
thing is,
okay, so
I thought he was mostly right at the time, and now he turns out to be the true sage.
oh, dude, he
Um,
was way ahead of his time, and now it's like the Alex Jones was wrong jar. I need to switch the label because it should be the Alex Jones was wrong jar. That's the one that's
well,
going to be the
hold on.
the
The
one-off.
funny thing, the thing that I find really funny with this is that all of a sudden the WEF people have dropped any pretense at what you once said brilliantly to me that um, these people are really good at hiding what they're really doing in their words, but they can't hide it in their symbology. Their
Yeah,
symbology gives the game away. They don't even need to bother with that anymore. I mean, yesterday, the World Bank came out saying, in order to get to net zero by 2050, which we must do because it's fundamental to the survival of the human race, because we cannot adapt. We've never adapted once in our entire history
the
of
the human
evolution.
superpower. We're going to stop doing that.
Yep, absolutely. We're going to stop doing that. And fundamentally, you do know that there's been no environmental change in all of the years that humanity has ever existed on this earth. Full stop. Okay, so good. We've got that base well established. So the World Bank came out yesterday saying we must stop farming. As far as I'm concerned, what they're basically saying is that all of the land between the cities in which we would have our matrix type world exist are just inconveniences in between those cities that we must transit. They're not functional spaces. The thing is, humanity is rooted in land. if we stop having our connection to the land, forget about the environment, forget about all of it. It's irrelevant. It's not a world, and we're not human. But that's a whole other day's conversation again. Forgive me for taking us down that route. ETFs.
Yeah.
So what
So
are
the
ETFs? We've said
yeah.
exchange traded funds, and what they
So how's it
effectively
different
do.
from an exchange? What I mean, like how's it different from buying this on Binance versus why would I buy it on
Okay,
an ETF?
because those aren't exchanges. They are single-sided market makers. So if you're sitting in a
Sure.
big institution who are a responsible institution, like let's say someone like US Bancorp, huge custodial bank in the States, have never played stupid games with anybody else's money in all of as long as I can remember. I've never once seen US Bancorp's name on one of the um
Wacky sheets.
yeah. Um
Hmm.
so let's say you're a real institution who are really looking after people's money as well as you possibly can and taking your fiduciary responsibilities seriously. You can't do business with Coinbase, Binance, any of these people. They're not multilateral trading facilities. They are single-sided market makers, and your risk, as you've identified, because you give them your money and you give them your crypto. They have both the asset and the fiat.
Hmm.
All of the risk is theirs. Sorry, forgive me. All of the risk is yours,
Right.
and they have all of the assets. Okay? So if they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, you're going to pay the price. You, the person who trusted them with your money and your assets.
Okay.
Now, if they were regulated, that would be one thing, because then you'd actually have real insight into the management, or at least somebody has. The whole thing when we talk about trust is that somebody should have the ability to oversee an activity that requires trust. There should be a second set of eyes looking at something saying, okay, so these guys are complying with this reporting, they're providing this transparency, you have this ability to question what they've done and how it's done and how the records have been kept, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's
Yeah,
what
like it can
regulation
be
really
audited.
tries to do. It can be audited. It regularly is. That's what it means to be regulated.
Right, like the Federal Reserve.
No. Um, the Federal Reserve isn't regulated at all. Who are you kidding? Sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I was hoping for a bright ray of light to come, but no,
No,
I guess not.
no. The whole thing about the Federal Reserve is that it was actually, uh, you know this better than I do. I don't know who I'm talking to. The Federal Reserve was brought about by a bit of very surreptitious management of who was in the Senate at the time. And it's
It was
anyway,
totally discussed in detail on the Senate floor.
it was
Totally.
and rejected repeatedly. Anyway, forgive
There
me.
is that.
But yes, in theory, a regulator is themselves accountable to an elected legislative or executive, one way or the other. Um, of course, we know that's not the truth, but that's another day's conversation. So coming back to ETFs, you asked the question, what's the difference between an ETF and being able to transact directly on an exchange? The difference
Mhm.
is you're dealing with a real financial institution, an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange. That's a real financial institution with real accountability processes, everything. It has the whole thing about how do you get to having an ETF. It requires approval from a whole series of people to say, yes, you can do this, and yes, this is the correct way of doing it, and yes, it's worth having. So an ETF is a highly structured, regulated, accepted instrument that has an entire financial ecosystem around it to accentuate its transmission from issuer, the investment bank who's bought the underlying asset or is managing the underlying asset, or the hedge fund, the asset manager, all the way through to the person who's trying to allocate their pension fund. Okay.
Okay, so this is an actual two-way market when you're in the ETF
Yeah, so it
world.
lists on the New York Stock Exchange or the American Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange, any of the big household name exchanges that are real exchanges because they're actually multilateral trading facilities. They're institutions that other big financial institutions have profound relationships with and provide facilitation to and are facilitated by. Okay, so you're basically plugging something into the entire financial ecosystem and all of the organs of sales and transmission that it has. Right the way
Okay.
from the investment bank that originate the deal flow, structure the deal flow, and then distribute the deal flow to the asset management companies that then start to transmission that out to their shareholders. And very often the really big asset management companies like BlackRock, how many individuals do you think have got accounts with BlackRock? You could probably count them on an amputated two hands. You would need to have the ability to give them a $250 million check just to be allowed to buy a share in a BlackRock fund. So who buys them? Big pension funds
Big
that
pensions,
you
right?
put your money into. Big asset management companies, corporate governance, corporate pension funds, etc. These are the things that are putting money into the likes of BlackRock and so on. And in turn, they're then creating these structured products. So an ETF is a structured financial product that fits in the existing financial system and benefits from all of the capacity to distribute that the existing financial system has, which is phenomenal. And it is also a phenomenal means to give lots of people more feed into the pig trough that allows them to get their food and puts you, the end investor, the retail investor, at the very bottom of that trough. You're the one who actually earned the money to put into the system, get the least out of it. Now, that's one of the big inequities of the existing financial system as a whole. But the specifics of what's going on when we have ETFs for Bitcoin and Ethereum, I touched on this earlier. Neither one of them can ever really succeed, nor should they. That's a big issue. So their actual intrinsic value is
Right,
zero.
but so they're becoming the crypto flavored versions of meme stocks now.
No, I wouldn't go that far, because that's a slightly different track.
So what
So,
exchanges?
so,
What
so
is
go
an
back
ET,
to what
what's the,
venture capital companies ask. If you have a crypto project and you go to a venture capital company, what's the number one metric by which you're valued? It's your community, as they call it. How big is your community? How engaged are they? How many of them have signed up to a wallet or to use the service? The actual numbers of use, the real numbers that a financial service person should look at, like what's your revenue, how much of it is recurring, how much of it is lumpy, etc. That's all out the door. All the traditional stuff that people would look at in terms of understanding value in markets, gone. It's how big's your community, how engaged are they, what financial commitments have they made? Because what they want to know is, when we put a chunk of money into you to pump this to the moon, because number go up, and God, look at your economics document, there's no economics in there, that's fantastic. This is just a recipe for how we put the number to the moon. Number go up.
actually
Right?
true?
That's
It's
exactly.
actually
I'm
true.
just telling the truth here, right?
Oh my God.
So
Okay.
what they want to know is, how many bag holders have you got? And how can we make sure that they're holding as big a bag as possible when we and you, Mr. Founder, jump out the window?
Okay.
Right.
All
So
right.
that's the small scale version. That's the layer two, Me Too joke thing. That's the meme stock. They're the meme stocks. Okay. Because the reason why I would say it's not a meme stock thing is meme stocks don't really hurt that many people, because on the face of it, they're ridiculous.
Right, right. Well, and the people getting into meme stocks are usually getting in them as an attack on, like, they're not really looking at it going up for real, for real. That's part of the joke. But
It's yeah, but
what I mean, what I meant by that is
it's
that,
evidently ridiculous. So
right. But my point is that, like, the ETF world lets, so what I meant by meme stock is, you're saying that Bitcoin and Ethereum wind up being exposed to, like, legit exchanges, like, ASE and so on, the
and
same way that meme
they end up
stocks
in
are.
your mother and father's pension fund, in mine.
Right, yeah.
They
So,
end
like,
up they
this
end
is
up
stuff that's
being in the
viable
school
on
board
Robinhood now.
funds. Yeah, the point of it is this is weaponizing your ability to create a multitude of bag holders. So basically, what's going to happen? What happened with the Bitcoin ETF? Why was the Bitcoin ETF such a big deal for the Bitcoin whales? Because it meant that they no longer had to play the game quite so often in the crypto world, which was much harder for them to do because it's that much more transparent, which is a flaw, not a positive in the crypto world as far as they're concerned. Okay. People can
Ooh.
see that the actual transactional flows are the same wallets. They can
Mhm.
see that there's just, what's the
Right, but
phrase?
this is like an opacity barrier
Right. Uh-huh.
between which is kind of how exchange the crypto exchanges are too. You can't see because the stuff inside the exchanges is not on real wallets or like notional
Uh,
wallets.
yep.
So when if I send you money, if I send you like specifically, if I send you USDT or Bitcoin or something like that inside of an exchange, that's a notional transaction. Never really hit the chain.
Mm-hmm.
They'll start charges a bunch, um, but yeah,
No,
that's not even a real transaction. It's
no,
a notional
nothing
exchange between
moved.
us.
They have a ledger they've updated, which by the way, nobody oversees, just them. You have to trust them totally, even though they're not regulated in any way, shape, or form of any meaningful way.
Right.
Um, yeah, all of the above. But what's happening with this is instead of look, if you're looking on the exchanges, yes, you can have all of this palaver go on. But if you come off the exchanges and you're actually looking at wallet to wallet transactions, you can see that it's the same wallets, right? So that's why
Hmm.
they wanted to move to the exchanges and not have peer-to-peer transactional frameworks as blockchain would lend itself to very, very easily.
That is weirdly sneaky.
It gets sneakier because now if you go to the ETF end, what you end up with is a massive buy-in to Bitcoin from, let's say, BlackRock. BlackRock did the Bitcoin ETF. I think it was BlackRock. Pretty sure. Um, Whoever it was did the Bitcoin ETFs. They've done them, and they had to go out and buy Bitcoin, or at least they had to have a relationship with somebody who has Bitcoin that says, "I'm willing to give you Bitcoin if you call upon it," which is a whole other no, that's a whole other layer of how the existing financial system works. They're called asset gatherers. So asset gatherers in the existing financial system very often lend the call upon their assets to financial institutions that are trading them. Let's not get into that because it's a whole other world, and
I
we could
thought
be.
that was the handsome guy of the group that you sent into the bar first to check it out, but no,
No, no, no, no. This is a whole other world of fun that we could get into for days. Um,
dude.
so
Okay.
it's really hard to stick on the ETF point because there's so many entertaining worlds that it touches into and opens up.
Yeah, there's so much adjacent clownery going on, but that's paints the whole picture of like how like what was the impetus behind this?
Okay,
Maybe it wasn't just getting us into
but let's focus on what it really is. An
right.
ETF is a very structured financial instrument in the traditional financial services world that benefits thereby from the incredible capacity of our existing financial system to distribute buy-in, to
Okay.
distribute and profit from buy-in, all the way from large institutions right the way down to the pigs at the end of the trough, the retail investor. And by
Right.
retail
Look,
investor, I
right.
do not mean your parents or mine. I mean people with $1 million or more to invest. If you are a true retail investor, you don't even exist on this radar. You are merely going to be you'll have a pension fund, but you won't have any say in it whatsoever because you're far too stupid to have a say in it. We'll just leave it to these people. Anyway, before we get into
Right.
that topic, which is another one altogether, um,
This is a crazy topic.
if you have a huge amount of Bitcoin or Ethereum, how do you get rid of it? How do you sell it? Because in the existing system, your limitations are liquidity. And remember I said earlier, I was talking about massive ETFs, and the more successful they get, the bigger the problems they have are, because actually when you have a million shares in Dell, it's really hard to dump them in the market without moving the price.
Yeah,
That's
right,
actually
right.
not true. A lot more than that will trade, but you get the idea that
No, but
There
if
comes
you
a
are the
point,
market,
yeah, there comes a point where you actually force the market to move because of your
mm,
actions. So your actual liquidity is not what you think it is. Your price is not what you think it is. You could do a mark to market, but that's not the price at which you'll get out. Okay.
mm,
So and I can tell you lots of fun stories about seeing how that was manipulated in the markets from back in the day when I was on the trade desk. But
mhm.
that's another day's discussion. So if you
Well,
have a
this
lot
even
of
goes back to
Bitcoin,
diaries of people trading on the London exchange or during Tulip Mania and so on. There's diaries from people
yeah,
discussing this exact issue where I got in too deep. I cornered the market, but then the market fled. Now I'm just like, got everything. Whoops.
yeah,
Um, there's wild stories like this that you kind of have to go, you have to find someone who's familiar with the history to tell you where the right books are to find this. But um, it's like all this stuff has happened over and over and over, but it's a bit
the
arcane to
wild
look it
part
up.
isn't the story. The wild part is that we continue not to learn the lessons of those stories.
Yeah, right.
So
And yeah,
think of it like this. You're sitting on a mountain of Bitcoin. You've been playing this game since 2014, where you push the price up, you get lots and lots of chatter, and then you are selling into the rise. And then everyone figures out that there's just no volume left in this, and it's all hot air, and it goes ooh, like a balloon letting out the air. And it's a bit like I said in Davos at the start of the year. They talk about rebuilding trust, and I said, well, it's a bit like a balloon, a party balloon. You're going to blow it up so many times before it loses shape. Well, that's the
hmm
problem the crypto industry has. The market that it's captured and the one that it's very expensively acquiring through all the massive marketing that it's been doing. Billions have been spent on marketing to this world. If Coinbase or Binance spent as much on innovation as they did on Super Bowl ads, you and I wouldn't need to do what we're doing.
yeah, no, that's true. That's
So
uh, well,
so
it's just thinking from my perspective, I'm thinking of like there's like a couple of cures for cancer and a few space programs absent from the picture here that's just gone into not doing anything important at all, which blows my mind.
so if you're holding a large amount of one of these assets, you've basically got a party balloon that's been blown up too many times, and it's becoming really expensive to blow it up again. To find those willing fools to take your bag the next time you dump Bitcoin is becoming really hard. Okay.
Yeah, I had a girlfriend like that too.
Look, do you remember when Elon Musk came out saying that Bitcoin was the greatest thing in the whole wide world? And the
hmm
price absolutely took off.
mm
And then a few months later, he turned around and said, it's no longer that good an idea. We're out now. Now, they still have some, but they offloaded a lot. And I believe they offloaded a lot into that pump. I can't prove
mm
it, but that's what I believe to be the case. And that's what the whales in crypto have been doing for a long, long time. The
mm
big difference between the existing financial system and the system they would like to implement is that they haven't yet found the means to socialize risk that the existing financial system has. We saw it in 2008. We saw it again last year and the year before. I think it was last year the biggest financial bailouts. The bailouts of those banks in California was so big it actually exceeded the European bailout from
Yeah, that was either
2008. Was it
yeah, I
22
think
or
that's
23?
2023.
23. It was 23.
2022 to 2023, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's but yeah, the scale of the bank collapses in just California had been bigger than the European cascade of 2008, which
Yeah.
is and then nobody in the financial press want to talk about it.
Of course
Just
not. Yeah, because yet again, all the risk got socialized.
Jim
So
Cramer said it was all good, so we're fine, obviously.
yeah, well, you know what? If you get your ideas about the markets from Squawk Box, you should just not. You should just give your money away to a charitable cause that's good. There are some.
hmm
Find one. Because it's, or as I say to people, if you're going to gamble, do it well. Go to Las Vegas and blow your money and have some fun.
hmm
Um, anyway, digressing. So, what is an ETF? Highly structured financial instrument that allows you to permeate and access the entire financial distribution network. Every single RIA in America is going to be telling their clients you should have some exposure to crypto without knowing an iota of what this is. one of the core rules of investment is invest in what you know. If you know nothing about something, don't touch it. We're going to break that rule because we're going to give you an ETF, and ETFs are trustworthy and ETFs are good. But what are they to the blockchain whales?
That's carry trade rhetoric just carried over.
It's all the same thing. Look, there's no original marketing in this space. It is rinse and repeat. All of
Wow.
the things that are being said, rinse and repeat. It worked the last time, and people are still too stupid. Look, in what planet did you and I grow up in thinking that somebody could actually say that nobody in the West should be farming by 2050? Did you
Oh,
ever think that would appear as a headline? Never mind a headline that is only being repeated on Twitter by so-called libertarians.
mhm.
Actually, do you see it in the Daily Telegraph? No. Supposedly the
No.
conservative paper of record in the United Kingdom. Do you see it in the Washington Post, the New York Post? No, 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 no. And yet we have the World Bank saying that its objective is to stop the West farming because we should instead rely upon people who can't feed themselves to feed everybody. And how are we going to get there? Oh, actually, no, that's not true. What we're really going to do is Bill Gates and his pals who've invested in fake meat are then going to supply us with fake food. Welcome to the Matrix. Anyway, before we get into the deep, dark end of where all this is going, let's get back to ETFs. So
Meat
I
ETF.
look at these ETFs as being industrialization of the bag holding process that crypto VCs have engaged in for the last decade.
Right.
It
Okay,
is
so
industrializing that entire process, and it's doing it. It's going to put crypto on the books of everybody around the world who has access to the existing financial system and has the ability to direct investments in that system, including those who do not, who will end up just getting it anyway. This is a mass bag holding operation. And in fact, the Bitcoin crowd was so flush with their success in the biggest bag holding operation going in crypto that they're now advocating central banks taking crypto onto their balance sheets. Central banks would be better off investing in other illiquid instruments, like, for example, how do we really solve energy? Let's build molten salt reactors. Let's fund fusion. Let's get hydroelectric dams built back up again in Switzerland, in France. Let's do some sensible things with something. No, let's go sticking it into an asset that actually is simply a square on an axle. It is a wheel that cannot rotate.
this is so the way that I kind of saw exchanges, the way that they operate, where they take my fiat and hold the crypto in trust for me and so on, was that and facilitate those trades where if I send you, as long as we both have a Coinbase wallet, like that's how a lot of people trade crypto to each other.
Yeah,
Is
it's the
they
same as
don't
me
they don't
sending
want your
Revolut
real,
money to my wife. It's not real money. It's just
yeah,
Revolut make the balance sheet on my app change by X amount and make hers change by X amount on the other side. It's not
right,
real. The money is,
right, but that
it's not
solves
actually, they
the
don't even have the money. It's in a real bank over there somewhere.
right, but that that masks over the problem of the effective transaction rate of like 3.9 per second or whatever, that there's no possible way Bitcoin could actually function at uh, as a global currency. Um, so in a sense, there's like a layer two aspect to what the exchanges had affected a lot before there were such things as layer two. ETFs wind up like putting that on steroids in a whole
Correct.
different kind of way.
It's basically, so earlier on in the conversation, I said the existing financial system privatizes profit and socializes risk. It abrogates responsibility for those who are actually benefiting most from the long-term outcomes. Okay. And I said the great jealousy of crypto isn't that they want to replace banks in order to create a more equitable system. It's that they want to replace banks in the sense that they want to socialize the risk and privatize the profit. And ETFs are basically a tool for them to do that. And the great difference is if you buy an ETF for gold or an ETF for oil or an ETF for the S&P 500, you're buying something that actually has a real value.
Hmm.
Whatever happens to gold, it has a premium on it for its so-called flight to quality nature. Okay. But it also has an industrial use. So no matter
Hmm.
what happens, it has a price, and that price is not zero.
Correct.
If your asset relates to a blockchain that isn't a blockchain, you cannot tell me that Ethereum, especially now it's moved to a proof of stake, anonymous proof of stake. If you want to know about that, look at some of the other videos we've done about this. That's not a
Yeah.
blockchain. That's not an operational format. Never mind the fact that it is profoundly flawed. Its move to proof of stake didn't increase its capacity one iota. It remains slow and expensive. It's also profoundly flawed. EVMs are dangerous, Solidity is worse. The reality is, it isn't a functioning blockchain. Neither is Bitcoin. 3 transactions per second is irrelevant. 3 transactions
Hmm.
a second is the train station here in Maynooth at 5 to 9.
Right.
There's 3 turnstiles. That's all it needs to be. 3 turnstiles and a flood of people coming onto a train or off a train. That's 3
Hmm.
transactions a second. So you have 2 assets that relate to 2 things that amount to being squares on an axle, pretending to be wheels. And at some point, they're going to be replaced with circles, actual,
Hmm.
what we think of as being wheels. We're building the Gajumaru. It's a circle. It's the answer to that question. So what then is the value of Ethereum? The value of Ethereum is 0.
It's all in the narrative. Yeah.
The value of Bitcoin, look, I'm not so negative on Bitcoin. I think that it may have some value to some people, and it may continue to have a value that is not 0. Because
Hmm.
unlike Ethereum, it doesn't rely upon people seeing it as being more than a store of value to be a store of value, albeit one that is not remotely at the prices it sustains at the moment. Um, and I don't think it was ever intended to be that. It was intended to be a proof of concept for how to create an alternative payment system. That's what it was intended to be. This idea of it being a store of value is where it evolved to be when people realized in the Bitcoin whale camp that they couldn't keep sending the narrative of it being a currency because it plainly wasn't. So they just moved to a different objective. And to
Hmm.
some extent, they may make that argument, but you can't make that argument with ETH. Name a
Hmm.
project on in the Ethereum ecosystem that has done something useful other than raise funds. You can't.
Yeah.
There's tens of billions gone into layer twos to scale Bitcoin. Oh, sorry, to scale Ethereum. Now they're moving to Bitcoin. Why? Because they want to ignore that the underlying problem is so profound it just shouldn't be the solution. You need a new solution, not a fix to hide the realities that actually undoes the entire point of decentralization and forces you into trusting an unregulated, irresponsible body.
Hmm.
Um, so look, my my really huge objection to this is we are perpetuating the system of privatizing risk and socializing, sorry, privatizing profit and socializing risk. This whole drive to have an ETF for Ethereum is even more egregious than the one for Bitcoin because ultimately Ethereum has a long-term value of nil. I'm not
Hmm.
going to make the same statement for Bitcoin, but I am very anxious that so many people who have no comprehension of what they're actually talking about, because most people in blockchain don't even know what a blockchain is, never mind people outside of the blockchain community and outside of the blockchain world who actually do know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
There's no way they should be given access to or have pushed into their pension assets that really struggle to meet the definition of being an asset.
Right. So,
And don't forget, all that money that isn't going to innovation Where is it going? It's going to marketing. And marketing is not just telling people that, it's not just a Super Bowl ad saying, hey, come and trade on whatever exchange. I think the one that put the most into it was Sam Bankman-Fried's outfit, wasn't it? And I believe a
Yeah,
famous American football
FTX.
player was
Oh, dude.
Tom Brady
Yeah,
was
yeah.
their
There's a
front
bunch
man.
of stuff around it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyway, look, the thing of it is, I don't believe for a second Tom Brady or I can't remember whether it was Matt Damon or Leonardo DiCaprio was the other face. I don't believe for one second they really knew what they were pushing. They were just very happy to take an incredibly large check to push it. But
Hmm.
that's the top line piece of the marketing game. What you're not seeing are all the surreptitious discussions and sponsorships and jobs and all the other forms of bribery and corruption that are going on in the background to continually drive this agenda. I'll give you an example. 2018, I started coming above the parapet with what I was doing at QPQ. I knew. And I contacted a reporter in the space, allegedly a reporter. Now, I'm a little bit old-fashioned, so I think words mean something. And I thought reporter means report, to report, that you are somebody who observes a particular sector of the world and reports upon what's happening so that others can understand events. Behind that, you'd have an opinion writer and so on. But the point is, a reporter's job is to report. So I contacted this
Hmm.
reporter and I said, look, we're doing something really interesting. It's really transformational. His response was, how much are you going to, so what's in it for me? And I said, well, I'm giving you the scoop on the information that's coming down the track. No, I mean, you need to pay me, basically, was what it came down to.
So
You-
he's a paid shill. He's soliciting a payment
Correct,
to produce the story.
correct. But you needn't think that the traditional media are any different.
Hmm.
Why?
Well, obviously, look at the
Okay, so
things we've already been
look at
talking about
GB
they
News
split.
in the UK. A big campaign to stop them getting any advertising revenue because they had the temerity to challenge the existing cabal of the ITV News and the BBC News and Sky News. So those three were pretty well controlled. But here comes GB News saying we're going to really talk about things and we're going to go outside the M25 or what the Americans would call the Beltway.
Hmm.
Um, Massive campaign to stop them getting any advertising. So whilst the crypto reporter was really just a shill, so is the existing mainstream media because they're not going to say or do anything that dries up sponsorship.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that mainstream media are going to challenge any of these things when they rely upon all of these same institutions to pay their bills through advertising and sponsorship? No.
So okay, so we've got uh, a migration from the crypto exchange based number go up world to now that on steroids with pension fund exposure, general market exposure across anything that's like traded in the stock world, basically anything that's traded in the securities world is now this is an open avenue to
Well,
spend.
not yet. But this is what I'm saying to you is all the marketing muscle is coming behind this.
Right.
All right.
Yeah,
So
and they've got a well-oiled marketing machine that includes what should be unbiased, trustworthy media, but is just like parrot pieces.
and
It
it's a self-perpetuating machine. So LinkedIn is now filling up with posts talking about the Ethereum ETF. At least it is if you're in our industry.
mhm,
Maybe if you're in the car parts industry, you're not seeing this stuff, but I am.
mhm.
And
Well, I imagine
it's
X is the same way.
it's part and parcel of this whole thing that the agenda is being driven behind closed doors, where highly paid law firms and publicists and PR firms and marketing people and executives from the big crypto whales, big crypto exchanges, etc., so-called exchanges, are in talking to the people who regulate the regulators, the legislators, the most corruptible people in the world because they're politicians. And as we all know, politicians these days don't actually have a single fiber of morality, It's just what the latest Gallup poll told them to say, with a slight sprinkling of marketing penmanship.
Hmm.
That then equals a policy. They don't have principles or policies. So these people, the most corruptible people in the world, are sitting with the people with the biggest checkbooks, who are most willing to write very large checks. So, Mr. Everett, would you like to get re-elected? What does your election fund look like? We can put together a super PAC and blah, 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 blah. Right?
Right.
This, the really egregious, profound part of this is not on the top line. There's a lot on the top line, but the really dirty part is happening below the line, and it's feeding up. So what happens? This becomes a piece that's in the news. The idea starts getting put out. Suddenly, everybody who thinks that they're a crypto influencer needs to be talking about this, because if you're not talking about this, you're missing out on the numbers. Why did we start doing this video? Because it's a very topical point, and we thought we should address, because we have a different point of view. But at the end of the day, everybody is talking about this now. Everybody in this space is talking about this. This is how
Dude,
it germinates. This is how it gathers momentum and becomes an accepted credo.
but which means that, okay, so that also includes that this weird dynamic where a kernel of effort winds up spawning that's got a corrupt motive, winds up spawning adjacent efforts that magnify it from people that aren't even bad actors or just caught up in the cycle.
Correct.
Which is exactly how I reread recently the uh, uh, McKay's account of the South Sea affair, and it reads extremely similarly to this. In that case, and this is before, like way before the end. This is, I think, probably before Telegraph. Um, I forget the exact year the South Sea affair really exploded, but this is the paper traded London exchange. Um, and within a day, prices, the book prices were going outrageous places. That had a final flare up that collapsed, I believe, within a summer. Which makes me wonder if the ETF flavor of Bitcoin, if there is, or not Bitcoin, just Bitcoin slash Ethereum, the ETF efforts that are going on, when those come out and they explode, which I'm sure that they will, it's probably impossible for them not to. Once those are exposed to anything that pressures them in terms of, like, back to the roots, what is Ethereum actually worth as a chain? Can it perform? Does it have a money function at all? If that turns out to be pressured by any kind of competition, I kind of feel like this is a crescendo before the end, because this can't go on forever.
Yeah. So,
These feel like
okay.
like
All right. So
first pump,
let
first
me
dump.
let me read out a headline for you.
Okay.
This is from Bloomberg. Record Bitcoin ETF outflow buffets BlackRock Fidelity funds. Investors pulled 564 million from Bitcoin ETFs on Wednesday. Cryptocurrency on pace for worst week since August last year. Give me a date. Is this before or after the halving?
After. Wait,
Correct.
August last year?
Correct. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. August last year was its worst week since August of last year. This was just before they managed to shake out all the people who might be hodling that shouldn't be, because you didn't earn the right to be a whale, and then started the pump, right? So the pump is all running toward the halving. Boom, 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 boom. Same thing happening again that's happening with the ETFs, which is start getting this into the media, start getting this into the talking points, and all of a sudden you get a ripple effect, because everybody who thinks that they're crypto evangelists, whatever, they're all putting out the same things, talking about the same thing, and driving the same agenda. Bitcoin's going up to the moon. Halving. The halving is everything. It's all going to be amazing. The idea of the halving actually isn't that at all. But let's put that to one side, because God
Right.
help us that we would use logic when assessing a situation. Um,
How did that become an event in people's heads anyway? I don't get it.
well, that's a whole other day's conversation. But the point is, 2nd of May is the date on this article. record outflows. This whole thing, if it wasn't obvious that this was a bag holding operation at scale, how obvious does it need to be? I mean, do we need to get to the point where the World Bank is telling us to stop farming before we'll wake up? Because we're one step away from it being that obvious. And people should be furious about this because yet again, the working person, the hardworking people who actually make the world work. What is it? What percentage of the economy are SMEs? Is it 90 something percent?
It's 92%, yeah.
Right. So 92% of people being screwed over to make the richest people even richer. That is what
That's
this is all
phenomenal.
about. That is what every single part of this is about. And if it doesn't make your blood boil, you shouldn't be in blockchain or crypto, or for that matter, you shouldn't be in financial services. But sadly, all three industries are replete with it.
Dude, well that kind of gets to the point that this is like straight up lizard people programming.
I just don't understand how people can't see the obvious truth that's parading in front of them. Bitcoin is not a payment system.
Hmm.
Read the white paper. It was never intended to be anything other than a proof of concept payment system. And if you doubt that, read the goddamn paper.
Hmm. And it from that perspective, it hit it out of the park. It proved, hey, this can work.
It was
Now
fantastic.
let's
But
make it,
just because a proof of concept is fantastic doesn't mean that it's the end.
right.
What do we talk about in terms of the Gajimara? We tell people it's a beginning, not an end. What's the beginning?
Hmm.
The beginning is an actual blockchain that really works with a real cryptocurrency that actually works. That's your
Hmm.
beginning. That's your beginning, not your end.
Hmm.
I'm sorry to shout, but I'm furious about this.
It's
It profoundly disgusts me because it is everything that is wrong with the existing system being taken outside even the grace of some pretense of oversight that we have with regulation and legislators who supposedly regulate the regulators.
well, not to mention that one of the core ideas of, okay, we're going to make this a currency that no individual organization can debase on their own
Uh-huh.
because it's distributed and anonymous
Uh-huh.
and trustless. So trustless and anonymous, which comes with a whole set of technical penalties, which are tricky to mitigate. And they found a way to kind of make it, well, again, it was a proof of concept in Bitcoin itself. But one of the backstops to that was that even though this is trustless and anonymous, the ledger itself is open,
Uh-huh.
which means that you can't exactly audit in the traditional sense necessarily. But once you've identified actors in the system, you may audit to some degree, but you can always, all the money winds up being traceable to its origin at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the ETF thing, like the exchange is through that kind of for a loop already, but the ETF thing, it's sort of like the ultimate level of tossing that
Yeah,
insight
so look,
away.
you asked a question earlier, and I gave you a technically correct. I gave you the Microsoft answer, technically correct but useless, right? Um, because I said I differentiated them in terms of the regulated operations that they exist within, et cetera, et cetera. As you were talking there, it dawned upon me that the real answer to that question was this. Um, in order to get you to buy a crypto asset through one of the so-called exchanges, single-sided market makers with excellent marketing to pretend they're an exchange, they have to get you in the door. And they
Hmm.
have to get you to give them your yen, dollars, francs, euros, pounds, drachma, whatever it is you have, right? They have to get you to part with that. And then they get you to buy something on their word that it exists and that if you were to call upon it, you could have it.
Hmm.
Obviously not true, but and if it were true, all of these so-called exchanges would be actual exchanges and be regulated as such. But let's not get down that. That takes a lot of muscle, a lot of money, a lot of marketing is required to get you to pass through that portal.
Hmm.
It takes not just the above the line marketing, it takes all the surreptitious stuff. It takes getting the guy in the pub or the cafe to tell you this is a good idea. Right? That's a that's a square wheel again on your cart, and it takes a lot of power to move that. Yes, a square can rotate, but it takes a lot of power to make it do it.
Hmm.
If we can go down the ETF road, we dispense with the need for any of that marketing. All of that cost is gone because now you have one of the most well-oiled distribution machines in the world essentially operating to do your job for you. That is now, you get an ETF, you put your Bitcoin into it, you get dollars back, yen back, whatever it is that you want. And BlackRock, Fidelity take their ETF and run with it. And it gets distributed to every single person. You may not know that you have exposure to Bitcoin right now, but if you have a pension fund that is not self-directed, which is true of the vast majority of people,
Hmm.
might be your state pension, for example. You have Bitcoin. If these people get their way, you will have ETH in your portfolio. And the truth of it is, Bitcoin's value is very, very low. Its intrinsic value is between a group of consenting adults, probably in the same sort of way as Monero or something like that. It's vanishingly small because it
Hmm.
doesn't have the ability to be more than a proof of concept. And all the so-called layer twos, the runes, the what's the
Yeah,
other
the runes,
farce that
right.
they've come up with? There's runes, and what's the other joke? It's not.
I
It
don't,
shouldn't be a joke, but it is.
it's, oh,
Ordinals.
ordinal. That, yeah, there
Yeah.
it is.
Okay. So all of these so-called layer twos, which are really just trying to pretend a square is not a square, you don't need any of that anymore. All you need now is you've got an ETF. So it all just flows because now every single pension fund advisor in the US, they're a registered investment advisor. In the UK, they would be a high street pensions and financial planning consultant. These are the people who call to your door and say, "Hey, can I sit down with you and do your financial planning, your estate planning, your pension planning, etc." If you have more than 100,000 in liquid wealth, you inevitably have a relationship with one of these people. Well, they're all going to be selling you ETFs in Bitcoin, ETFs in Ethereum, which have a net future value of zero.
Mhm. That is, that's a wild idea. So, but this is definitely going to be a a component of bundled financial products that people won't know that they're even getting into because it's fund directed. Um,
Correct. And
which
that's why
which makes
that's
it
why I
feel
get
like,
so angry about it because
yeah, it feels
it's
like this
one thing
inflection
to
point
fleece
before a weird
somebody,
ending.
right? It's one thing to fleece people in full knowledge of what they're buying. They
Hmm.
may not understand what they're buying, but you've told them it's a cryptographic asset. You've told them how its so-called economics operate, etc. And they've made a decision like a big boy or girl to part with their cash. What we're talking about here is an egregious means of privatizing the profit from the pumping of Bitcoin and Ethereum and socializing the risk. If
Right.
you're not angry about it, you shouldn't be in
Because we
this
can't let those
industry.
pension, yeah. So the way this gets socialized, just for to cover part one of the methods this gets socialized is the pension funds, if they are the firefighters' pension of the San Francisco Fire Department, we can't let that fail. So
Sorry,
if
I
this
just,
component
when
of
you
it,
said that, I
if
just got the YMCA thing in my head.
yeah,
The San Francisco firefighters. Anyway, sorry, go on before we get
yeah,
into dangerous
so we can't
territory.
let those people go like broke
Yeah.
because that would be a tragedy. Um, the state pension fund of for whatever social workers that have retired in Oregon, they can't lose a big chunk of their pension just because ETH went under. Um,
No, they're not.
so,
They're not. This is the whole point. Okay, so portfolio management theory
well, I mean, the
would
government's
say
going to
that you
step in at
don't,
some point.
not necessarily, because right, portfolio management theory says that you should have a diverse basket of assets that you are exposed to, and you shouldn't
Mhm.
really concentrate wealth in any one thing. Um, one of the reasons why the banks had the problem they
Well, I
had.
didn't. Now there's Bitcoin and Ethereum.
No, yeah, but so let's say that um, no RIA except one who's desperate to get an orange jumpsuit on at some point in time, or is a crypto contaminated lunatic who will definitely wear an orange jumpsuit at some point in time in their future, um, is going to tell you to put more than 2 to 5% of your asset base into these things.
Hmm.
So it's not going to bankrupt you, but it's going to make you a bit poorer. It might make you feel
Hmm.
good in the short term, but long term, it's going to make you that little bit poorer. And in this way, the socialization of risk is seen as being acceptable. Now, when the banks socialized risk, what was happening there was a concentration of assets, a
Hmm.
concentration of rubbish driven by low interest rates. And low interest rates artificially maintain this idea that money has no value, which the central banks then proved by printing money like it was going out of fashion in response to the collapse.
Hmm.
Actually, Elon Musk did it very well the other day with the rules around monopoly that when the bank runs out of money, it can just create bits of paper and circulate them instead.
Hmm.
Um, that's basically what happened. Uh, but the socialization of risk and the privatization there were very obvious because this was really big. Concentration in commercial property, commercial development, you know, land banking, and um, the development of massive retail and office and industrial and housing. Um, and very often in that environment, it was trying to sell whatever it could to whoever it could, with almost a number go up type mentality that land prices will never go down. So when
Ooh, that's a really foundational assumption too of the current system, which is expansion forever, with no plan for if there's ever a real contraction.
yeah, but so are we going to see pension funds and people made destitute as we did in the 1930s? Many of the people who attacked what happened with what was the name of that video company in the US that they went after the pension sorry, the hedge fund over. They were shorting the stock, and so these people bought tons of it just to screw
Oh,
the hedge fund over.
oh, the GameStop and AMC.
GameStop. So all of that was driven by anger because the
Hmm.
people who were behind that told the stories of their parents eating dog food so they could afford to eat as children to eat something.
Hmm.
Um, and so that socialization of risk was really obvious and really overt. This is much more subtle because they're not going to get more than 2 to 5% of your portfolio allocation. Whereas if you think about your cash reserves, they were 100% exposed to massive commercial property illiquidity and a bit like you become the market, right?
Hmm.
Um, so are we going to see people unable to feed their children without making dire compromises elsewhere in their lives as a result of the ETFs of Bitcoin and Ethereum? No. Um, does that make it morally okay? No.
But it puts the category of the subtle socialization of, how would you say, asset aggregation, which is not unlike the way that in the same way that inflation acts as a tax. It's unrepresentative.
Right. But look, why do the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? because of socialization of risk and the
Hmm.
privatization of profit. That's ultimately what all of this comes down to. And if you're in blockchain for the right reasons, you've got to see that as the great moral sin that we're actually fighting against.
Yeah, exactly. That was like the whole point, was to get away from this, which was the reason that the Nakamoto white paper really lays out this problem about the debasability of money. And they're really just pointing out the Fed problem. This is like the extended this is the same problem with derivatives. The moral problem with some derivatives is showing up here, but it's a derivative problem in a whole different way. Um, then I never This is a very weird kind of left field problem. I never would have thought of ETFs, which leads actually up to two. I have two remaining questions for you. One's really easy. One's maybe a little bit require some discussion. But the first one is: Are there uh, is there any such thing as an ETF for like the U.S. dollar?
Yeah, it's the dollar index.
Now, is that a forex thing or is that like an ETF?
Uh, bear with me. It's been a long time since I looked at these things. I can't remember off the top of my head. Um, there are certainly currency ETFs, and are there US dollar ETFs? I don't know. I think there was one, but to
Okay.
answer the question,
Wow.
there are currency ETFs that would probably be a basket of currencies in some way, shape, or form that's probably very dollar heavy, in much the same way that the S&P 500 is very top 100 heavy.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty wild though. All right. So that's the thing. Um, the second question would be, um, why are why would a forex not carry Bitcoin, other than maybe the complication that they don't have a way to actually get
Okay,
Bitcoin and
so
give it back without these
this is
giant
relatively
transaction
easy.
fees?
So back in the days when I was a trader, if I wanted to go from Swiss francs to Japanese yen, I never went from Swiss francs to Japanese yen, ever. It was a really dumb thing to do. Why is it a dumb thing to do? Because the liquidity was wafer thin, which meant that I couldn't move a volume, and it meant the spread was really wide. So
Mhm.
if I went Swiss francs to Japanese yen, I could be looking at 10 points in the spread easily. And if I had volume, I could be looking at
10 points being 0.1%.
no, 0.001. It
0
sounds
points. Okay.
small, but when you're talking about vast amounts of money, it's
It's
huge.
not. Okay. If it's enough money
It's
that you're
it's
talking about
it's
in
a
percentages, then
basis point, right? A point is a basis point. Okay, so
okay.
a 50 basis point move is so 25 basis points is very often how you see interest rates move, right? So if I'm
Hmm.
doing a 10 basis point spread on a small trade, I'm probably looking at 50 points on a big trade for something that illiquid. So what I do instead is I go Swiss franc to euro, which is heavy liquidity. I go euro to dollar, heavy liquidity again. And then I go dollar to yen. Now, I have
Okay, I see.
done transaction one to euro, transaction two to dollar, transaction three to yen. And that was more efficient than going there to there.
Right. Because somebody else is doing this other route.
Well, because everybody else is doing this other route. Those
Right.
each of those pools have got massive liquidity. So I'm basically going from liquidity point to point to point to point. Now, let's say I want to go from US dollars to Bitcoin. Now, that's probably the biggest liquidity pool there is, but your pool is still wafer thin.
Hmm.
Okay, so if I actually wanted to move any real volume in that, let's say, for example, I'm a pension fund. I'm an insurance company. Um, a great hurricane has just hit New York. I'm looking at $1 trillion of weather-related claims. I'm going to have to liquidate a big chunk of my portfolio. Can I liquidate $100 million worth of Bitcoin?
Mm,
I don't know. I know the answer is no, but I don't know how much it would move the market. But I'm pretty sure if you went to dump $100 million worth of Bitcoin into the market right this second,
right.
you would
It would
watch the
move
graph
it'd
do
move
this.
something.
You'd
Yeah,
move
right.
really fast, right?
Hmm.
Because actually the volumes available are thin. Now, big players aren't buying at anything like these prices. They're waiting for it to keep going down, just like they did the last time, and the time for that, and the time for that. So the volume isn't there. So that means as a currency trading house, you're taking a big chunk of risk. So if I say to you, you're my market maker, I'm the pension fund, or I'm the insurance company, and you're the poor guy at Citadel that I pick the phone up to and say, hey, listen, I need to dump I need to dump $1 billion worth of positions, and I want you to take 100 million out of my Bitcoin holdings. You're either going to wear that risk as a trader, in which case you're about to get your P45, whatever the American equivalent thereof. You're going to get sacked because the
Hmm.
minute your risk manager finds out what you've done, you're sacked. Um, or you're going to move the market massively by having direct impact on the market.
Hmm.
So there's no way you're going to want to make a real market in US dollar to Bitcoin. It's not liquid enough. There's not enough depth in the market.
Right. Well, and all the trade happens in these derivative or closed marketplaces instead of actually on chain. So the actual trend,
Yeah,
how do you even prove who's holding what at a certain point within the scope of, I guess it's like gold is kind of like this, right? You've got these like massive gold reserves, but then what's being traded is paper.
yeah. But then that opens itself up to the same vagaries they talk about with Burgundy. So I forget the numbers, but it's quite a comical difference between the 2 points I'm about to illustrate. Um, so I'll just give an example number because I can't remember the exact numbers. 1 million liters of Burgundy are produced in France every year, and Burgundy can only be produced in the region of Burgundy. Its limitations are literally physical. Okay. The variability would be how dry a season it was with the year they were picked, and that's going to drive the actual number of liters of Burgundy that can be produced in the region of Burgundy that are farming grapes for the purpose of creating Burgundy wine.
Hmm.
So let's say that's 1 million liters. Something like 20 million liters of Burgundy is actually sold in the market every year.
Hmm.
Yeah, now you see the problem. Okay. And
Right. It's like
if
the Chinese Italian tomatoes.
well, look, people think that this just doesn't happen in the financial world. It does. It happens all the time. One of the more famous ones was it was actually a fruit company, and they got bought out by I think it was Total Fruit. And when they made the final offer, and they went to buy all the shares, and they found that there were far more claims to have shares than there actually were shares on the cap table. And this is in a regulated financial industry, a heavily regulated financial industry. There were far more people claiming with perfectly good reason to believe that they were telling the truth. These weren't fraudulent claims, that they had shares in this company. I forget the name of the company that was bought out. And that's just a well-known example. It's not, it's not an uncommon occurrence. Because remember, you've got hypothecation and rehypothecation.
Well, that's been happening through the metals market. And I don't mean precious metals. I mean like
Oh, yeah, metals,
industrial
nickel,
materials.
nickel,
Yeah, yeah.
iron.
Yeah, really important like
Well,
nickel, iron, tungsten, aluminum, or bauxite, whatever. Um, we've had different asset managers have gone, okay, so how do we what's a good way to mitigate risk if things break down in terms of um global shipping volume? Let's basically stockpile pre-positioned giant mountains of bauxite and so on. They've tried to do this. Some folks who are a little bit slippery There's a specific Indian trader who was like famous for this, and he just disappeared with all the money he made. Um, but he was sending containers of like rocks and dirt, not mined, pre-processed ore. I mean, just rocks. Like he just had like dudes shoveling rocks in the container so it weighed about the right amount, and then they'd seal it up,
Sorry.
put the stamp on it, and ship it off with all the papers saying, "Yep, this is totally bauxite." And they bought this as an asset, as a physical hedge against other losses or breakdown in trade and whatever. Then they're like, okay, well, the metal holding company went out of business. We're going to liquidate. Who are we going to sell this off to? They get their buyers list together, and they're like, let's go check what's in the containers, because eventually it does come down to the actual thing. Like someone's going to try to use this
Uh-huh.
stuff now to make aluminum, break some containers, and it's just like random. I hope you like the smell of rocks from Mumbai, because that's what you got. And that was it. Like just rocks, nothing in there whatsoever. So the only values that had actually transited hands, was the amount of money that eventually got to this guy, uh, with a little bit of the overhead of shipping all this stuff by weight from A to B. That was it.
Which is a wonderful metaphor for the ETFs.
Yeah, like that's, dude.
Oh, it is, because if you think about it, the companies that provided the shipping, that provided the container, did all those other things, they all got paid, right?
Hmm.
The same as the
And
people
they did
who
real work. They
manage.
just
Yeah,
didn't know it was useless.
yeah, but so were the people who manage these ETFs, who are selling these ETFs, the distribution channels, all of those guys, they're all going to make money. The people who will be stuffed at the end are the people who actually bought the instrument, or in your case, the container full of rocks, none of which are a useful ore.
Yeah. Yeah, they weren't the good kind of rocks. They were just rocks.
They were just rocks.
Um, like there's a bunch more over on the hill. Why didn't we use those? That's
Well, because they didn't come with any official paperwork that said that they were something that they're not.
There
Like,
you go,
that's a whole other day's conversation about authenticity and provenance.
dude. This is so stupid that I was talking with Peter about this the other day, about how like there's layers of just dumb happening that nobody gets to see the truth of until it comes down to that point where, okay, we got to actually send Frank to the yard to like break a seal and check the product out, which doesn't that the delays years. Like it's even beyond the statute of limitations to go try to chase that Indian dude. Um, he's out. Um, there's so much of this going on where there's so many layers of fake business between real business end and real business end, that we're just like, you know what? We give up. We should stop trying to make real products. We should stop trying to educate people about the difference between real software and fake software and all this other stuff. We should just start selling an API business where we are going to fix the problem, because it's got obviously a big problem. We're damaging the planet with old bits. And so we're going to recycle bits. So whenever your computer is going to overwrite some memory and free memory, every call to free is going to send your trash bits to our service, and we will recycle them for you. And we should just charge people based on how many bits they send us, and we will send bits back out into the world as recycled bits, as a new network random source. Um,
Hmm.
Now, we made that as a joke because obviously this is the stupidest idea ever. However, that old joke, we kind of dusted it back off. We're like, we could probably actually make a real business out of this, because people are that crazy.
Hmm.
Um, and if enough people bought into this, that we got to recycle bits for the planet. I mean, we could get like, A-list actors to, we should put a Super Bowl ad up. Um, it would be enormously expensive to operate something like that, because the bandwidth requirements would be insane. We'd be
Hmm.
running a whole host of machines eventually, running this useless service. Um, the value of it as a true random source is very low, because we could just get some atomic decay and measure that instead, and get true random, like really, really true random. Um, it's the whole thing's preposterous, but it's about the same level as what we see. Like we could probably market that into one of these systems where, when you start a new online project, one of your VC questions is, are you using the bit recycler? And they have to check, yes, we're recycling bits.
Yeah, it's a bit like have you bought into the fallacy that man is the sole reason why the Earth is warming? No. Okay, well, then you can't do any business with the European Commission or anybody who's ever had a penny out of the European bribery fund, sorry, the European Innovation Funds, um,
Right.
or anybody who's active in any of these funds. So think again and tick the box another way. It's like many years ago, I was standing at the dispensary being handed my button parachute. And the guy said to me, "How much do you weigh?" And I said, "Do you want that in kilos or stone?" He said, "Give it to me in stone." I said, 17 stone. He said, "I don't think you're right, sir." And I said, "No, no, seriously, 17 stone. In fact, I'm 17 stone and a bit." And he said, "No, I think you said 15 stone, sir." I went, "Ah, yes, yes, 15 stone. I'm 15 stone." Ah,
Yeah. That's oh,
what he
that's
was
I got a
really
buddy
saying
who
is, I'm
I
gonna
got a
fit you.
buddy who's
I'm gonna
six
fit
three
you.
and he became a
I'm gonna
helicopter
fit you for
pilot.
a. What he was
No, I'm
saying to me
six
was,
one.
yeah, he was basically saying to me, listen, I'm going to give you a parachute that is capable of bearing your weight, but it has limitations. And if you give me a number that goes beyond its limitations, I'm not going to give you a parachute. So if you want the parachute, think again about how much you weigh.
Oh man, it's funny too that if anyone's ever been in the military before, there's so many things where there's a rule and then there's reality. And there has to and then there has to be a
And the
way
only way it works
to
is
bridge the
because of the
gap.
reality.
Yeah, you've got to bridge the gap from regulation to reality somehow. And if you do, you can win. But it's like one of the checks on like, is this guy gonna be in a like you're in the infantry, so you're gonna deal with just the chaos that is real, like purely. So one of the first checks if you're gonna be an effective infantryman is can you pass this test? Um, to bridge between regulation and reality. And and it's not always trivial. Sometimes
No,
it's pretty
it's
complicated.
fundamental. I mean, jokes aside, if you were to follow the rule book precisely in many fields, you would be in trouble. If you were to follow the rule book precisely in the context of the military, especially the military today, which is so heavily administered and legalized to the point that every single after action report is now basically a means of hanging out the people who were served to dry at some point down the road, undetermined by whom or when. Um, if you were to stick religiously to the rules, you'd just be dead. The end.
Yeah. Well, the rules for, when I was taught early on, uh, the kind of codified rule for military riding was never say nighttime parachute drop when you can say sub daylight gravity assisted vertical insertion. And and I
Yeah,
thought that was I it was it's a that was supposed to be a joke. It's an
it's not a
exaggeration. It's a
joke.
joke.
That's
But
that's
now,
what they actually write.
ooh,
It's
like
a
you
bit no, but
really
hold on. You know what? I think it just went off my mind. Whoever came up with those things is now
is like a
working.
Bitcoin marketer now.
No, they're working for the layer twos because those guys
Oh
have
yeah,
got
yeah.
the best marketing going, and they basically they will use very long, very dense, verbose sentences of all sorts of words that you may or may not have heard of before, but you for damn sure are not going to stand up in front of the whole auditorium and say, "What the hell does that mean?" to make themselves sound really smart. Exactly like the guy who said, it's not a nighttime drop, it's a sub daytime, or what was the phrase you used again?
Sub daylight gravity assisted vertical insertion. And now the reason that I was taught to write that way for certain content, certainly not when you brief around men, but when you're speaking up to an unknown, like you're not talking to the B team or you're on battalion, you're talking to like, echelons above reality that really want their own combat patch. Um, those people will hang you out to dry if the aircraft you thought you had you didn't get, you were able to get Pilos instead and you fast roped and it was dusk instead of 3 a.m. You're still covered because it's sub daylight, gravity assisted, and it is a vertical insertion of some form. So you can get even vaguer, like we would say movement to blah, and they would just never specify method.
But ultimately, the objects of such language is to obscure the truth. Right?
Yeah,
And
which is sad.
in the context that you're talking about, it's obscuring the truth because the people, the audience don't actually want the truth. It's a different thing. In the so-called Web3, and I know that's a trigger word for you, so I'll be careful, but in the so-called Web3 blockchain crypto world, the purpose of that is to obscure the truth that you're buying a Ponzi scheme that's number go up, that has no real value, and the whole object is to normalize the act of stupidity they were asking you to commit.
Well, this has the same stink to it that I don't like the other one for, which is OPSEC is supposed to be protecting operational information from the enemy.
Uh-huh.
And instead, you go to probably equal links to protect your own plan from your own side, not your own men, but your own, like the people that are supposed to be supporting you.
Mm-hmm.
Adjacent unit coordinated adjacent units and up the chain. And that, because shit, post infiltration, middle of an operation, I've pioneered this operation. I'm the one that did all the flying with the, Navy people to figure out how to do this. We're going to use a P3 as our aerial relay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is great. And it's got an amazing, like, we're never going to get this good technology in the Army. The camera set that they've got on the P3 is
You
incredible.
know why that is? It's because army people keep sending ugly people to the Pentagon to ask for money. You need to send
There might
you need to send good looking. I mean, that's the whole reason the Navy has that outfit. It's that, they have the dark blue and they have the whites. It's so they can look like rock stars with
It
a
is
bit of a
pretty
fake
sharp,
tan.
actually.
They get a bit of
Yeah,
fake tan, and all of a sudden they look like rock stars. That's how they get
yeah.
all the money.
Well, there is something to that. The 1940s the 1940s army dress were like that was fantastic, and it's just been downhill since then.
Yeah, back then the
Um,
army had aviation and most of the boats.
that's true.
It
Um,
is.
yep. They those planes went off of my granddad.
So
He was because he was Army Air Corps, right? And then he became Air Force.
the
When that was
takeaway
a
for
thing.
the U.S. military is if you want to get more money out of Washington, dress better. Anyway.
That's true. But this stink, that pattern of stink is really sad, where we're performing an OPSEC task against ourselves. And there is this obfuscated language to protect what's actually going on inside. Like the whole point of blockchain is to be transparent and provable and
Yeah,
repeatable
you
and so
touched on
on.
it earlier. You were saying something earlier about you can have an anonymous proof of work mint, such as the Gajimara mint, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean it doesn't have transparency or accountability. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that you're facilitating bad actors to behave badly. That's not the same
Hmm.
thing because actually, wallet A transacted with wallet B, immutable ledger states this to be true.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is great if the whole point is to actually do some business. And you can get state authorities to come in and say, essentially, the message from state authorities is don't do business. You're suspect automatically, which is not that's not the way to go if you want to have a flourishing economy to draw from as a state. Some states get that, some don't. But that combined with this multiplicity of different consensus engines that can operate on associate chains, all with the same currency, this is, I think, where we're hitting the sweet spot for making a genuinely useful cryptocurrency, as opposed to kind of like figure out how to make this work projects, which again, Bitcoin, Ethereum hit out of the park in terms of proof of concept. But anyway, this ETF thing is uh, it's deeper than I thought it was, and I didn't fully understand kind of what from the fund manager's perspective, what would be the motivation to go this direction? Didn't
Fees,
really make sense to me,
lots and lots of fees.
man. Um, well, and from the whale perspective too, like there's a few different motivations at action here, and none of them were this just a currency. they wouldn't really make a lot of sense. But in the case where they're not, and they're now viewed as a store of value, and this is an expansion of the number go up game, um, it's it feels dangerous actually. I've definitely got a more
It is
skeptical view.
dangerous, and I know I make myself very unpopular by challenging what people are putting out in various social media. I know I make myself very unpopular when I'm at a conference or an event in Zug or Zurich or anywhere. And I say the things that other people really don't want to have said. Um, so yeah, yesterday, a guy I know, a nice guy, put up a post about Ethereum ETF, and he wasn't providing commentary one way or the other. He wasn't saying it was a good thing. He was just providing a good report as to what was happening. None of the whys, none of the wherefores, and he didn't take sides in the argument. And my response to him was to say, what does this serve? Because I despise the number go up community. You know, all the crypto skeptics in the world don't hate crypto bros as much as I do. And they hate them because they see the fraud. I hate them because I see the transformational capacity of the underlying technology to transform everything for the better. And the longer people use it as a tool for scaling fraud and scaling Ponzi schemes, I mean, basically, Bitcoin stopped being Bitcoin and became Betcoin and then became an open Ponzi scheme by 2017.
Mhm.
Um, that makes me angry for all the reasons that I came into this industry. I don't want to see small people being turned into bag holders. I don't want to see the poor being turned into bag holders for the rich. When I
Mhm.
first started out in asset management, I remember, uh, okay, so I didn't start off wanting to be an asset manager. I started off wanting to be a barrister, but then they brought in the Lord Wolf reforms in the UK, which meant that if you were going to go down the route of the commercial bar, as I intended, because I had realized that law had nothing to do with justice, so there was no point doing any other aspect of it other than the one that made the most money. So I was going to do competition law specifically. And I was going to do that because almost no lawyers touch it because it's not a dry subject. It's a subject that involves economics, politics, commercial realities, etc. So I had done my bar course, gone back to Ireland to stay with my parents, and um, start studying for a PhD in the transnational effect of EU and US antitrust law. Um, Something I probably shouldn't admit to on a broadcast, but I engaged in something that's called Hail Mary banking while I was doing my bar course. So I was employed by an American law firm part-time while I was doing the bar course. It's a year's course, the bar vocational course in London at the Inns of Court School of Law. And right next door to the Inns of Court School of Law is a pub called the City of York Pub. Best pub in London, or at least it used to be. No TVs, snugs all down the side. You could get all your friends in there and drink and have nice food and just basically do what people used to do, talk. And we had great fun in there. And I used to give them my card on a Monday and sign it out on a Friday. And Hail Mary banking is where you get to the ATM or the point where you have to sign your receipt at the end of the week in the City of York pub. And before you hit enter, or right after you hit enter, but before it has time to respond. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord with thee, blessed art thou amongst women, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for sinners now at the hour of our death. The man, good Catholic boy, right? Good Irish Catholic boy response. So basically, I'm praying that Virgin Mary will magically make money come out of the machine. So there was a small flaw in my plan, which was that the Inns of Court School of Law had not actually cashed my tuition check. So at the end of the year, they refused to give me my results until I paid the check. And I said, "But I gave you the money." He said, "No, we still have the check." I said, "But that's your fault." "No, it's your fault." So talk about settlement issue being an issue. Right there, you have an example. So I had
Wow,
assumed,
yeah.
because I wasn't looking at my bank account, remember? I was just working on Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord's with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women.
Mhm.
And she clearly wasn't doing her job because the £15,000 check to the college hadn't been cashed. So I had to go and find the money. Thanks be to God, I managed to borrow the money from an uncle of mine. And then I had to go and get a real job. So I blagged my way into an asset management job because my father had always been interested in financial markets, and my grandfather had been involved in the foundation of the credit union movement in Ireland. So I knew my way around it a bit, and I literally just blagged my way into this job. And I got to love the industry because you had to learn something about everything.
Mhm.
Talk about butterfly effect. Anything and everything you looked at had that operation going on. And the more you could understand how the connectivity worked between a cause and an effect, the more you could actually think and strategize an investment plan to capture that effect,
Mhm.
which I loved. What I hated was the way that they treated customers. And I never got, I came from a well-off family. We never had money worries growing up or anything like that when I was a child. But my parents both worked and they worked hard. So the money they had saved, the money that they invested, wasn't wasn't printing money. It was money that they'd put aside. And
Mhm.
anytime I picked up the phone to a client, I had my father in mind. That if
Mhm.
when my father rang the broker in London, what did I want that broker in London to do for my father? I wanted him to be treated with respect. I wanted him to be treated well, and I wanted him to get an answer to his questions. And actually, the clients that would ring began to say, no, I want to talk to Greg, even though Greg wasn't their portfolio manager, because I had a policy of always answering the question. And if I couldn't answer the question, I would go away and research it, and I would tell them, I will call you back in 4 hours' time, and I will give you the answer.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure quite where I began this story, but um, what I learned then that upset me was just how poorly thought of the actual clients are. The people who've got 100,000 to invest, the people who've got 1 million to invest, the people who don't have the ability to write extraordinarily large checks, but can write checks that you and I would consider to be significant.
Mhm.
They are they are the there's a layer below them, which is the people who don't even have that relationship, who just get what they get given, right? But
Mhm.
these people are very obviously a completely mistreated customer base. And the worst one I remember was this client had been advised to buy Yahoo at $125 per share. Yahoo, even with all the money printing in history, is never going to recoup that value. Um, and it was down at something like $8. I mean, massive loss of value. We're touching on this with the ETF question earlier. And so good portfolio management theory means that, there's not so much contagion, but actually there was quite a bit of tech contagion in anybody's books back then. And this is where
Mhm.
the ETF thing becomes dangerous because it begins to self-perpetuate and it gets from being a relatively insignificant 1% of the portfolio up to 10, 15, 20. And now it's really significant. And at that point in time, tech made up somewhere between 10 and 15% of every portfolio in the house. And it was tanking because people had been buying into things that never would have that value. Like I remember a guy coming in trying to sell sneakers.com to me at £100 million valuation because they had the domain sneakers.com. The end. And every question I asked was like, no, dude, you're just not getting it. We own the domain sneakers.com. Okay, so do you have a distribution relationship with Nike, Adidas, Reebok? No. Okay, so how we have sneakers.com. That was the disease, and we're seeing that disease play out again. Um, but this one client rang up the guy on the desk opposite me, so I got to hear the whole conversation. And he wanted to know what a professional asset manager was doing, advising clients into tech stocks at the peak of a boom, ETFs in Bitcoin, peak of a boom. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of that's what I meant. Like it feels like that.
It does, right? So we're playing the same game all over again. But he wanted to know why a professional asset manager had advised him to buy on a discretionary portfolio. So actually, the asset manager had allocated all these tech stocks, the most egregious example of which was Yahoo. And the answer could only ever be come up with somebody who did not give a damn about that customer, how hard they had to work to put that money in there, or anything else, which was there's air pockets in the market. You know, when you're crossing the Atlantic flying to America, and all of a sudden the pilot light comes on, and the pilot comes on the intercom and says, "We're going to hit some turbulence, put your seatbelts on." Well, that's what this is. And that angered me so deeply because I could, I projected my father onto the other end of that call. And I thought what I would do if someone had said that to my father, punch his lights out.
Mhm.
Now, I know that makes me a Neanderthal and all the rest, but I'm not denying what I am. But
Strong like truck, smart like truck too.
but it's just so very, very wrong. And that's what makes me so angry in crypto these days is that smart people who have the gift of that intelligence, who've got the ability to communicate, the ability to lead, the ability to take us to a better place, have instead prioritized short-term profit and screwing over the little person who should be able to put some faith in those who have better knowledge, better access, and greater authority in an area than they do. But they can't, and they've been screwed over by them. And that conversation, air pockets in the market. I mean, let's put that in context. If you were flying across the Atlantic and a pilot steered for a hurricane and you went from 30,000 feet to 800, I'm pretty sure you'll punch the pilot's lights out.
Yeah, that wouldn't be, especially if it's deliberate
Yeah.
or
No, but it's not even about deliberate. It's that there's a huge hurricane in the middle of the Atlantic. Do you fly
yeah,
north of it, south of it, or do you fly straight through it? Fuck it, we'll just fly straight through it.
right.
Oh, look, we just went from 36,000 feet to 800 feet in 10
What
seconds.
what's it's a discretionary portfolio, but what's the value of that discretion
Right.
if you're going to do this?
So the thing of it is, no pilot would ever do that to their customers,
Well, we're
the people
working
who
on new
trust
ones
them.
now.
Well, look, no pilot has ever, to my knowledge, well, there was that one guy who I think they reckon was trying to commit suicide and he took the whole plane out with him. But
Yeah,
if he's in hell, he deserves to get the poker placed in areas he
the
can't
thing.
see for a very long time. But uh, pilots don't do that to people who entrust them with their lives crossing the Atlantic, crossing a continent,
Mhm.
going from Dublin to Heathrow. They don't take those risks. So why do we think it's okay when it's our money, our value, our industry, our work? You know, we have a finite resource, which is our time, that we try
Mhm.
and monetize in order to ease our way through life. And we've got people predating upon that. You save money, we're going to predate upon that. We're going to socialize our profit. We're going to socialize the risk from our profitable activities upon you because you've saved some money. This
So,
is this is so destructive at every level. It's not just immoral. How do you sustain a society in which this occurs? You don't. You end up in 1917 and people being put against walls by the mob all over again.
yeah, or you wind up with this. Well, that's one way it can play out, and the other way is um
Thermonuclear
the
war.
well the so the kind of that's when the wave crests and it actually breaks, you get something like that. When they're able to control the wave and slow it down and give it enough space to breathe, you wind up with this sort of slow, suspended, perpetual fall version that you see in a place like the CCP economy, where the only way things can be controlled is if everybody is actually controlled, and you are either a pauper or a billionaire. But even if you're a billionaire, that
You're a
could get
pauper.
snatched right from you in the next second because you don't really own anything. So you wind up with this wacky problem where the billionaire in Beijing has a lower quality of life than a millionaire in Tokyo, because the millionaire in Tokyo is
That's not
working.
true. That's completely false. You wouldn't have to be a millionaire in Tokyo to have a better quality of life than a billionaire in Beijing.
Right, but you get the point.
No,
Like
I
being a
do.
millionaire in
I'm
Tokyo,
just being facetious. That the reality
but
is
yeah,
that
it's like it's
no,
the reality is that the guy living in Tokyo's got a fantastically higher quality of life because he's in a society in
the
which,
average working man in Tokyo has a fantastically better way of life and security of life expectancy and everything else
yes,
than the billionaire in Beijing. Yeah.
yeah, all that forward, like what's the classic problem of man is that we are facing always forward risk in the term of uncertainty. And that is still, it's wildly uncontrolled. And there's a wild, random, highly negative tail to everything that's done in China, no matter who you are. Even for Xi, it's a very unforeseen, chaotic potential future. And outside, so you've got outside of the inner Politburo in China, the whole rest of the country is fingernails that can be trimmed away as an expense for mitigating that chaos just for the inner Politburo, not even the Politburo, but the inner. Well, that's not the way that Japan works. So you have this weird thing where, do you want to be a billionaire or a millionaire? Well, obviously a billionaire. Okay, well, let's contextualize. Would you rather be a billionaire in Beijing or a millionaire in Tokyo? Well, the obvious answer is to be a millionaire in Tokyo instead. What what's the path to creating the world where you get Tokyo instead of Beijing? And it's this high faith answer where you say, let's not do destructive things. It's almost like
No,
there's a
no,
Hippocratic
that's
oath
the key.
missing from
It's
the
the
financial
high faith
markets.
answer. And in a high faith system, exactly like you've outlined, and Japan is a wonderful example. The Switzerland's another. The UK used to be 40 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, is you have people who have a professional code of conduct that means something,
Hmm.
that they're not going to say, buy this because I make lots of commission on it. They're going to say, buy this because it's the best answer for the question you've posed. It is, this goes back to the balloon thing. This goes back to what I said in Davos back in January. The World Economic Forum had this idea of rebuilding trust. Well, how do you rebuild trust that you've pillaged, raped, and left bleeding on the Hamas did less to the Israeli women than the WEF has done to the whole wide world. And you want trust. You want us to give you trust again and again and again. Because what is trust for these people? It's a mechanism to screw you over.
Well, plenty
It's
of people who can't locate up Gaza on a map are marching for him now. So, um,
well,
which
yeah. Let's
that's another
not get
point
into
though
people
about.
being unable to point at a map because I remember someone doing a survey of where is Afghanistan in America in 2006, and
Wild.
yeah, it was Australia. Most fingers pointed at Australia.
That's
Uh,
funny.
but people being able to tell the story of Gaza um, are hen's teeth. I mean, the very idea that they fail to understand where the Jewish people come from is just preposterous. But
It's but it's a fascinating example of um, how easily malleable and programmable and seedable in a certain sense, whatever the narrative is, really is. It's another demonstration also that you can only have about four narratives going at a time. So that, like, we flip between the climate hysteria and COVID, and oh, COVID's over, so we got to flip to climate hysteria.
uh,
Why? Because we've got these other, in different societies, we already have three narratives moving. So the overarching one for the world, we can only do one or two at a time, which is
the thing is, okay, my response to all of the conspiracy theories ever has always been, you guys have clearly never worked for the government, because the idea that this level of competence exists within the government is laughable. Um,
Right.
but caveat, you're right. Narratives are being driven, and they are being driven from somewhere. Where?
Yeah.
Who? Where is the accountability? The thing I would say to you about Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs is you have no idea who is actually driving the price on Bitcoin or Ethereum. Who does? A tiny number of people know who the whales are, and those whales are known to have communication channels in which they basically decide what the price is going to be at a macro level.
Hmm.
And they decide what cycle everybody else is in. Now,
That's pretty creepy.
you could make that allegation of many sectors of the economy, but Bitcoin and Ethereum and various other joke coins or meme coins or whatever the hell they call them. Um,
Who coins?
who cares coins? Um, it's the one that you can't actually discern who is really making these decisions. For all we know, the biggest owner of Bitcoin could be George Soros. And
Hmm.
he's one of the whales that's driving the entire agenda. In fact, I can't prove it, but it makes inordinate sense that that is what's going on. Him and his kind. And him and his kind are deeply anti-human, anti-West, anti-human, anti the
Well,
civilization that we are derived from,
I'm, I was kind
anti-high.
of,
They don't even like high trust society, because high trust society, as
mhm,
far as they're concerned, is a euphemism for racism. It's not. Stop
mhm.
coming out with this nonsense in order to defeat a perfectly sound argument with
Right.
emotion. That is their entire game. Your point about narratives, you can only get emotional about so many things at the same time. So
Hmm.
we have to constrain the number of injections of emotion we're going to give you, because everything in Israel, Gaza, that's got nothing to do with logic. Nobody who's saying, ah, free Palestine, actually has read a shred of the history of the region. Not one piece. They haven't worked out. So uh, there's one that I keep correcting, I find on social media, and they're talking about how um, if you actually track crime figures for violent crime, rape, street crime, theft, etc., you find that an inordinate amount of it is being done by immigrants to countries, particularly from Islamic countries, North
Hmm.
Africa, all of the stans, and so on. Okay,
Hmm.
strip out of that and break it down to nation. Now, a lot of countries are opposed to you even having this information, but Denmark published it. And the number one criminal national group in Denmark, by far, off the chart criminality, are the Kuwaitis. Now, you've been to Kuwait. I grew up in the
Hmm.
Middle East. The Kuwaitis are the most conservative, they're almost the Switzerland of the Arabic world. Okay, they are super conservative, privacy, very quiet, very unassuming people. They are not the ones committing crimes. The ones that are committing crimes are all the Palestinians who were kicked out of Kuwait after the first Gulf War, because the Kuwaitis discovered that the Palestinians had facilitated the Iraqis invading their country.
Ah, that makes
The
more sense, actually.
Jordanians kicked the Palestinians out when they brought them in and said, "Oh, we'll help you. We'll provide care for our brother Muslims." What happened? The Palestinians tried to take over the country. What happened in
Hmm.
Lebanon, formerly a majority Christian country? The Maronites wiped out. But
Hmm.
for the Israelis in 1982, all of the Christians in Lebanon would have been wiped out by Hezbollah.
That's true. Yeah.
The
The,
Israelis saved the Christians that we all in the West just ignored. We were happy to let them be slaughtered because it kept the oil price down.
yeah, that's right.
Um,
But all these arguments though assume that the side arguing for Hamas even cares about Hamas when we're in this weird phase where the issue is not the issue. The issue is always a global revolution. This is just one more finger on the glove of global Marxism, which is in this like weird hybrid phase now.
Yeah,
Um,
it's reclothing itself as the green agenda, but it's nothing to do with green. It,
no, yeah. So
it,
it's the
it's
green agenda one day, it's pro Hamas the other day.
you know those
It's
questions you can ask somebody that immediately tell you the truth. It's like in blockchain. If you're talking to a company who's allegedly a layer one blockchain, you ask them what's your business model, and they say, "Well, we run the blockchain." Not a blockchain. Goodbye.
mhm.
Okay. So somebody says, "I believe in the green agenda. I think that we need to stop producing so much CO2 and we need to electrify and all the rest." Okay, great. So you believe in putting trillions of dollars into solving fusion. No, no, no. I want to put money into windmills. Get the fuck out of my face. Either you believe in the green agenda and you think we should go to fusion as fast as humanly possible, or that's not your real agenda.
Mm-hmm. It's like the they try to hide those pictures of the wind expired windmill blades getting like buried for eons
Yeah.
at these
Or
giant fields in Germany
the
and Texas
Norwegians
and places
admitting,
like that.
because they adopted electrification much earlier in cars in the West than others, that actually they've got massive problems with huge numbers of completely useless, unrecyclable lithium ion batteries that they're just burning. Rare earth
Yeah,
that took vast amounts of energy to be drawn from the earth. They're not rare, they're everywhere, but the concentration of it is hard and very difficult to produce.
right. And you'd
It's
think
not
that there
recyclable,
would
it's
be
just
a
being
big
burned.
rush towards how do we reuse some of these materials after we've
God,
denatured
no.
them.
Excuse me. Are you trying to inject a sustainability agenda into the green agenda? How dare you?
Right. This,
This
well,
is what got me in trouble in Davos. Remember, I said the reason I fell on my shoulder is okay. So when I went to Davos this year, I had no plan. I just wanted to try and see if I could meet people we could talk to about what we're trying to do, and maybe find some people that can help us with funding or fund us. And all through the week, I had just fortuitous serendipity taking me wherever I went, and any opportunity that came up, a little bit like the Jim Carrey character from the lawyer, the liar liar or whatever it was called. I
mhm.
just said yes, okay, and it was great. But I went to this dinner one night, and it was not so hot because what happened was, first off, somebody was talking about Israel and the Palestinians, and I spoke out saying that October 7th was the worst terrorist attack I can think of ever. It was worse than 9/11, and this is a table full of Americans, because 9/11 was moments of horror, but it was moments. This was hours on video, pride. This was people ringing their mum and dad, saying, "Mum and dad, I've just raped 10 girls," or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Um, I said, so that for me was like my soul on the road to Damascus moment, because from that point forward, I knew I could not hide my politics ever again. I would have to tell
Mhm.
the truth, because I think the truth is so important and inimical to everything we're trying to achieve as well. In restoring economic emancipation to the individual, which is the end objective of what we're trying to do at QBQ, you
Mhm.
have to contend with the political sphere as it is. And all of that
Unfortunately.
became abundantly clear to me, not just October 7th, but the reaction thereafter, the duality of policing, the guy being arrested, the Iranian dissident being arrested in London for saying that Hamas are terrorists, not the people proclaiming that Hamas should wipe out all the Jews from the river to the sea. No, they're fine.
That's fine.
We're
Yeah.
good with this. You, Iranian dissident, holding up a sign saying that Hamas is a terrorist organization. No, you must go to jail, and you must have egregious bail conditions placed upon you such that we won't have to arrest you again next weekend when all the people calling for genocide go on the streets again and we stand
Mhm.
cowering or kneeling before them. Um,
It's pretty clear who's
so
got balls too in that.
I think you're being very dangerous there. The assumption that somebody has balls is very dangerous to
Well,
make in this day and age, Craig. Now,
it
before we get
is.
into that landmine, let's go back to what happened in Davos. So first off, I was told that uh, an older gentleman, a very wealthy older gentleman, told me that he felt unsafe in my presence because of my views on Gaza. This is a man who's bigger than me, and I'm a large individual. And he's a lot wealthier than me. So, you know, he's probably got bodyguards and everything else just outside the door if he really wants to have a go. And he told me that he felt unsafe in my presence because of my views on Israel. And I said, well, you know what? If you come at me with something other than a CNN talking head point, I'd be very happy to engage in it because I believe in the power of Socratic discussion to elevate everybody's understanding and awareness. And I'm very happy to be challenged on everything with facts and analysis upon those facts that illuminates something that was not hitherto illuminated for me. So strike number two was this other guy started talking about the green agenda, and it was going on and on and on and on. And I was sitting there thinking, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. And then the other voice on my other shoulder was saying, but the deal for you to meet the people you need to meet in Davos was that you were just going to tell the truth. So you're going to have to tell the truth. So eventually I spoke up and I said, okay, so why do you always need to talk about man-made global warming? Why is it relevant that it's man-made or not? The evidence that we've had solar cycles that have really changed the temperature quite considerably over 5,000 to 10,000 year cycles is irrefutably there in the geography and geology.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we talk about, instead of being divisive, why can't we talk about how we might better utilize the limited resources that we have and how we might better distribute the unlimited resources that we have? Why do we have to have this divisive approach that tries to point the finger at certain people and make other people poor in order so that people who are already incredibly wealthy can feel good about themselves? You recall what I said to the NGO group about their work in Africa.
Which one? Sorry.
The one that said your entire objective is to turn every African into a
Oh,
Negro
right. Yeah, yeah.
who thanks you for the crumbs that you brush from your table into their begging hands. You don't actually want to help the people of Africa to find a way forward, to redevelop, to grow economically. You want to keep them on their knees because you, in truth, Mr. NGO, and the people behind that NGO who virtue signal so very well at the WEF, you actually despise the people that you give this money to. It's just a way of making you feel better about your unbelievable, unaccountable wealth.
It's amazing the degree to which aid actually is just purely weaponized once you get down to the actual
It's totally
distribution
weaponized
end.
because all it does is make them into, look, I'm not using the word as an epithet of race. I'm using the word as what they're doing. It's about enslaving people. It's about keeping people on their knees, and it's disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
Yeah.
what this green agenda is doing as well. Look, energy poverty is something that you and I growing up didn't even know about. I mean, the worst thing would ever happen in terms of energy poverty was the 1973 oil crisis, which wasn't
Mm-hmm.
that big a crisis. It was just that you Americans were running cars that did 4 miles to the gallon. So of course it was an issue. If you just run a European or Japanese car, you'd have been fine. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
digress. That's the issue. It's about energy. It's about the distribution of energy. It's not about making people poorer. You know, when JFK said we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade, did he know that he would do it? Did he know how he would do it? No, he just knew that if he committed the power of the American government, which at that time was a benevolent thing, or at least
Mm-hmm.
largely benevolent,
We
he
only found
knew.
out right afterwards how that had changed.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, Mr. JFK caught with his skull various means
Mm-hmm.
of understanding that the American government was
That
no longer
the
benevolent.
response message was a bit harsh.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I think they probably sent him a few messages before that one. He just didn't quite get the message. A bit like you Japanese people not speaking English. I thought it was really interesting earlier when we had a Bulgarian, a Swede, an English guy, and me sitting here in Ireland, that not one of us, and like when I do this in Switzerland, not once does the voice tell me in German that this is now being recorded. But in
Really?
Japan,
Wow.
yeah, in Japan, they give you the thing in Japan. So you guys just haven't got the memo on globalization yet. Um,
We joke about um Peter Harping and I have joked a couple of times about we have this ongoing argument where um I'm Unicode world is best world, and
Mhm.
he's like, no, ban Unicode, ASCII is all you need, and everything should all fit within the 27 letters, and that's
Uh-huh.
it. In fact, the umlaut's got to go too, and the S set that's right out. That's insanity.
Uh-huh.
Um, this conflict is kind of that where uh oddly enough, from the 1860s through the two times it's kind of measured, 1860s and then up through the 1950s, the Japanese literacy rate was around 98%,
Mhm.
which that was such a shock to MacArthur's weird little junta that was running the country after World War II, because he was on this big thing. He's like, I can't understand this drawing stuff, so nobody can. So we have to ban kanji and hiragana and katakana and make everything Roman letters, which are actually it's very hard to read and understand Japanese in
Mm.
Roman characters because all the richness is just gone, and it's kind of hard to make out what you're trying to say. Um, and he assumed that if I can't understand him, nobody can. So the literacy rate must be like 2%. It turns out that was the inversion of the literacy rate. It was 98%. That didn't fit into their head so hard that they did a public survey to try to establish whether that was true. And it was, and they're just dumbfounded. How can this happen in an era where we've got a crossover generation where all the prior generations never even had public school? How could it possibly happen without public schools that everyone can read, especially a language that has three writing systems overlaid on one another? Um, there's a cultural component there that the state can't touch and it's powerless in the face of. And there's a structure to society that doesn't make everything government decisions, doesn't make every policy governmental. That works really, really well, and it's that flourishing of life versus controlling of life type
Yeah.
duality. Um, and I think we're trying to get back to that flourish version instead of
Flourish,
control.
emancipate, flourish. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And look, so I'll tell you the end of the story in Davos. So, having challenged the green agenda, saying why can't we think more about the distribution of energy, the emancipation of energy, right? Why can't we make it so? Because to me, it's deeply racist, this notion that we have that we can virtue signal our way into poverty in Europe, but we can be telling third world countries, no, no, no. What do you want a fridge for? You want to turn, you want to
right.
flick a switch and turn on a light? Who the hell do you think you are? Stay in the mud hut, and when it gets dark, it's dark. Deal with it,
Oh,
right?
well, what was it? The World Bank told Uganda that they can't make their own fertilizer. They can't buy it from Russia because Russia bad.
Uh-huh.
Putin bad.exe still has the lock. And so don't buy it from
They
them.
probably told them in pidgin English as well, just to get the racism really up. You know buy fertilizer
Oh,
from Mr.
wow.
Putin. Mr. Putin very bad.
Oh,
You don't
man.
buy
They have a
no
BBC
fertilizer
Pigeon.
from Putin.
Dude, the BBC Pigeon edition is like golden for all the
But
wrong
I
reasons.
don't get how that. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Anyway, but yeah, they told him you can't buy fertilizer from Russia anymore. They
Mhm.
go, well, that sucks. So we'll buy it from you. Well, we don't make it anymore because it's bad. They go, well, okay, then we'll have to make it. We can do it. We just didn't think we had to, but we will. And then the World Bank says, no, that does not satisfy our green goals for you.
Uh-huh.
And or what? How they? It was that does not satisfy our sustainability goals for you.
Yeah.
And our sustainability goals for you. That's cool, but everything's got to be anti-colonial now. Like I don't get like where's the line? This is some really wacko. That's hard for me to fathom. Like
Look,
it's a whole like
if we're going to get
country.
into the whole thing about how socialism is basically a means of blaming everyone else for your troubles and absolving you of any need for responsibility or accountability, we could be here for a whole year. And it is now your time, 1 a.m., knocking
No,
on
no,
the
it's
door of.
almost midnight. Yeah, it's coming up to midnight.
Okay,
So we'll just
so
wrap this up.
I,
But
I think we need to wrap this one up and not open yet another. That's not even a
this just
rabbit
shocked me. I
hole.
was like, whoa.
It's not a
Like
rabbit hole. That's a whole mine. But to finish the point, so having had two strikes at this table full of American movers and shakers, I then heard a very senior politician from America who was at the same table opine loudly that 50,000 white, male, blue-collar workers will decide the next election. And he used each of those points. He enunciated each of those points with a disgust that rang in my ears. And I wanted to turn around and say, but hold on, you're a Democrat. Weren't people who work on factory lines in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, weren't they your core voter?
Yeah, they're supposed to be core
What did you
constituents.
do? Yeah, what did you do that made factory workers in America's Rust Belt think that you're an untrustworthy group whose object has been to make the virtue signaling rich richer at the expense of the average person in America's Rust Belt and agricultural centers?
This is like horseshoe theory of political dynamics where the Occupy Wall Street people had an argument, but they didn't know how to articulate it. They didn't really get how things are working.
I'm not sure. When the Occupy Wall Street group first started, I don't think they were socialists. I think they were people like you and I who were angry about what had happened. And I
Right. Well,
think they
that's my
very
point is
quickly
there's
got subverted by the socialist
yeah.
agenda.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Bernie
It's like there's a
Sanders. Bernie Sanders should have been the last person anywhere near that because the guy is worth
yeah.
hundreds of millions. Anyway, digress. But
But this is like a kissing cousin to the same anger that triggered the Tea Party. Like they should have been there's a
okay,
common
so
core to
hold on.
both of them.
That's that. What you're now getting into is the most stupid decision in British history, which is when a bunch of British gentlemen decided that they would go to another country, do really well in that country, but would now like to have a fair vote in order for them to pay their taxes.
Oh, I don't even mean that Tea Party. I mean the American Tea Party.
Oh, I think you meant the actual Boston
After
Party too. Okay.
no, no, I don't mean that. No, but this is actually all the same issue. This is all the same arc that's like coming back again. And in the US recently, it's played out in two different ways. One was Occupy, which was became it like you said, it came to be socialist flavored. But the Tea Party, which is of course a reference to the Boston Tea Party, but it was over the same issue. That's why they picked that name. Um,
No
was
taxation without representation.
yeah. So it was right. It was like right coded, but it was the same core issue. And Occupy was left coded, but it was the same issue. Then
Yeah.
the trouble is that the farthest right wing, they got a point right now. And the farthest left wing also has a point right now. And it's better to live in a country where neither one of them really have a point because everyone's being treated fairly. So just, go run off. But they're both got a point, but their point is connected. And they should, if they could let go of their weird pet issues, they would be united. But I think the
Okay.
pet issues
You
is
know
like
what?
that's the narrative point.
It's like this. So I was involved in writing the economic policy for a new allegedly center-right political party 10, 12 years ago. And I argued loudly for I wanted to have flat tax because I believe that there should be no representation without taxation, no taxation without representation. Okay. So I wanted people to have a skin in the game in order to have a vote. And I accepted that everybody had a vote. So therefore, everyone should have skin in the game. Okay. So however much you earn, there should be a tax upon it. Now, a lot of people on the left complained about this because they are in love with the politics of envy, which is not about a fair tax system. It's about making the person who is immediately above you in the earning strata pay more.
Mm-hmm.
It's jealousy, it's envy. Because actually, the super rich pay almost no tax in the current tax system. The tax system runs to phone books of regulation because it's so full of loopholes and people trying to close loopholes and find new ones. If you really wanted a tax code that worked and was fair, it would say as follows. There is a flat tax of X percentage, full stop. All economic activity will have this tax leveraged upon it, full stop. The government will dictate what that number will be in each tax year, 1 year in advance. Full stop.
Hmm.
That's it. That's the totality of a tax code. And then all of a sudden, you will discover, as they did in Ireland in 2009, when the economy was in the toilet, unemployment was at the highs it had been since the early 80s, that actually they had their biggest income tax take ever because they had implemented a very small emergency flat tax, which people called a turnover tax, because that's what it is. And the rich hated it. Why? Because all of a sudden they were paying tax like everybody else. So the biggest income tax take in Irish history up to 2009 was in the depths of the financial crisis because of a flat tax. That's part one.
That's bizarre.
Part two is the more controversial end. I wanted to have absolutely no corporate tax whatsoever because I think corporation tax gives companies and big corporates especially an excuse to say that they should have a say in what's happening in the country. And no, they shouldn't, because you're not a sovereign person. You are a company. You have very different purpose objectives from everybody else. That's why you're a company. The third part was I wanted to have a national social income because not just because I have any kind of great bent toward making people feel better for no point whatsoever, but because I accept that society needs to provide some sort of, within a community, we should have some sort of a base that says that people don't starve. We don't want people to be lazy either, but we don't want people to starve. And we don't want people to be without healthcare. And we don't want their children to be without schooling. We don't want that contagion to occur. So rather than have an extraordinarily expensive benefit system, which is widely abused and costs almost as much to administer as it does in payouts, let's just bend the entire thing and just say, okay, so what's a base amount of money that's needed in order to pay for a base sufficiency? Pay that. It's a fraction of what we're paying in benefit tax or benefits right now and the cost of administering benefits. Now, I know for a libertarian, that's something that would stick in their craw. But to your point about the right and the left seeing the same position if you strip things away, do you believe in a free healthcare system? Sorry, a free education system? Do you believe that every child should have an equal opportunity to a good education system that will equip them with the necessary tools and frameworks with which to become productive, capable citizens? I'm not making an argument that our current education systems do that. I'm saying that I think everybody should have that.
I think that's a great ideal. I don't think there's any possibility for a government to provide that. I think that's a role that a different organized society must get behind instead.
Maybe so. I'm not saying it necessarily has to be a governmental thing. I'm saying that I would
That's the
want to
same thing with
see.
basic income. I don't think that that's the thing that a government has the capability to administer in a faithful way. Same thing with education. There's too much power wrapped up there over the long term.
Sure. So your answer would be to devolve that down to the community.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. But the thing of it is, strip away the mechanics of how you get there, and you still end up in the same place. Now, the socialist agenda would want to end up in the same place. It just couldn't possibly get there because you end up with something like the UK's NHS, which is far more expensive to run. And who does it serve? It serves the people who work in the administration of the NHS. It does not serve the people who rely upon it for healthcare.
Hmm.
And it certainly doesn't serve many of the people who work on the front line of it. So the people who work as physiotherapists, nurses, doctors, etc., are much less well paid than the people who work in the administration of the NHS and the Department of Health and all the other quangos and rubbish that perpetuate around all of this.
Hmm.
So your solution and mine would be to strip away all of those inefficiencies and bring this right down to the community and say, hey, you need to take care of the people in your community. Work it out between you as to how you're going to do it.
Which includes this burden of how are you going to do it? And not every system's going to work out perfectly evenly, but that's better than having a single system that's guaranteed to wind up getting all weird at some
Yeah,
point
but
and
hold
failing
on. Now
everything
you
once.
start getting into the value of community because to your
Yeah,
point
no,
you
that's
just
central
touched
to this.
upon. Yeah, but the point you just touched upon. So let's say I live in Urban in Switzerland. The next town down, the next Gemeinde is Unterregli, and then up the mountain is Einzelstadt. So let's say that Oberagri starts to provide people with a much better healthcare system, a much better school system than Unteragri. So people start to move from Unteragri to Oberagri. A little bit like people started after trashing California, they moved to Austin, Texas, and are now busy trashing that
Oh
via
yeah.
Denver, which they already trashed.
Yep.
Um,
Aspen. Whoops.
so where if those things are done at the community level, and in Switzerland they are. I think Switzerland is a phenomenal place in so many ways because of this. Um, you start to get pushback, and you'll get communities saying, "No, no, we're happy providing what we provide to our people. If you don't like how it works in your town, your Gemeinde, go and fix it in your town and stop trying to pollute ours."
Right.
They're right. You know, don't think that because you made bad choices over there that you get to come and inflict your bad choices over here.
Hmm.
Um, and ultimately, the destruction of communities that lies at the heart of urbanization, which feeds into why the WEF, in my opinion, and the World Bank are saying we should stop farming and just turn the entire countryside into an inconvenient transitory point between urban centers. Um, it's evil.
Yeah. But it really is
There's
community
no, I
breaking.
mean, I was trying to think of a nicer way of putting it, but it's evil. And at the heart of our human existence is the individual, the family, and the community within which they reside. And
Hmm.
when people talk about conservatism, they've lost what conservatism meant a long time ago, in my opinion. Conservatism is to conserve those three things. It's about understanding that even where we need change, the criminalization of being homosexual to the acceptance that some people are homosexual, you're not going to, if you try and do that by forcing function, you don't get there. If you try and do something that challenges the community's perspective and mores and values and ask them to think about something and adapt over time, you get real change. You get meaningful change without destroying the fabric of the thing that is so fundamental to our existence.
Well, but that change is uneven also, and you can't
Of
expect
course it is.
everyone
Different
to
regions
accept
will
your new
change at
way.
different rates.
Well, and you also can't expect that everyone's going to accept whatever this proposition is because you know it to be right. They may have a different system and a different idea about that you don't even comprehend because it's literally alien to you. And that doesn't give you the right to throw out the rule book, start politically subverting them, flood them with immigrants, do all kinds of weird stuff to break their system from the inside out, to reform it in your image. You don't get that right. That's a thing that people, the self-righteous, don't get about social change. That
Well,
we have to. Not everyone's going to view these things the same way because they're different living experiments.
okay, so at the moment I'm sitting in Ireland. The southeast corner of Dublin basically controls the political and economic agenda of Ireland. And it is all champagne socialism.
Hmm.
Um, and that's what they've done. You know, have they put direct provision centers for so-called refugees into southeast Dublin? Not one. They don't exist in the areas where the nice people who appear on the state television channels promoting this agenda live. They are in places where my family live, border counties, places with poor economic prospects, poor economic current, who have been marginalized politically and economically for generations, and who don't have good political representation in the Dáil, the parliament of the country. The town near the farm that my mother comes from, the population is more than half non-Indigenous. This is a rural town on a border with Northern Ireland that for 40, 50 years was economically cut off thanks to the Troubles. But also a place that when I was a kid, I used to go and visit my friends and my cousins, and I never knocked on the front door ever. You walked
Hmm.
around the back and opened the door and put the kettle on and told people, asked the residents who lived in the house if they wanted a cup of tea too. Um,
Hmm.
that's gone. And it's gone because we allowed a small cabal of people who had no skin in the game decide what everybody else was going to have to stomach. And look, what's the context of this to blockchain? Well, context of this is when the political system has the capacity to decide what money you have in your pocket and what value you can purchase with that money in your pocket, you're owned by them.
Hmm.
You don't really have a vote. I mean, what vote do you have if your choice is between, let's look at the United Kingdom. You've got a choice between Labour and the Conservative Party, primarily. Now, Labour, grossly incompetent Jew haters. Conservatives, grossly incompetent people with a propensity for inbreeding. The difference between them, apart from
Okay.
the inbreeding and the hatred of Jews, is basically a sweep of a marketeer's pen.
Hmm.
That's not a democratic choice. So now you have no democratic choice, number one. Number two, the non-democratic choice that you have are going to decide what value you own, how much you're taxed on it, for what in return. Everything. They get to decide everything, and you have no say back because you don't even own your own assets.
Hmm.
That fundamentally is what blockchain is here to change. It is here to transform us from a state of servitude to one of emancipation.
Right.
And
Well,
unless and until we have economic emancipation, we have no emancipation at all. And I come back to Switzerland. Why is Switzerland the heart of crypto, the heart of blockchain? Because
Mhm.
actually its rules and values and processes are already exactly what blockchain is about. They're decentralized. Your Gemeinde. So look at the political system in Switzerland. Any real decision, plebiscite. When the country is saying it's going to get rid of its FA-18s and it wants to buy F-35s, what happened? The people turned it down. Real decisions are being made by the people, educated people who are capable of reading the different points of view, making an informed decision, and the Swiss people take their voting very seriously. They do read all the information that they are sent, and they do make damn sure the information they sent is as informative and neutral in tone as possible.
That's fascinating.
The vast majority of things that impact your life, the schools, the health systems, the local provisioning of services, that's all done by the Gemeinde, which is basically the
Hmm.
town. What in an Irish context we'd have called the diocese. It's not just the town; it's the townlands around it and the villages and hamlets that touch into the town. Okay, so let's say 50% of what's relevant to you on a day-to-day basis is determined at that level. And guess what? You get to vote everybody in. And every year, your Gemeinde writes to everybody in the town, in the Gemeinde itself, and tells them exactly where they spent their money, what they spent it on, and what they're going to do with any surplus, or how they might have to make up something next year with a higher tax rate.
Right. Yeah.
Direct accountability for where your money goes. You pay us
Hmm.
tax, we give you accountability for the services we render.
That's actually what it's actually what like as far as local stuff goes. This is the monthly report from my village here.
Uh-huh.
And this little girl up here, she lived in the apartment next to mine last year, and
Yeah,
she wrote like some comment about whatever, and they printed it on the thing. But that's incredibly localized
right. But
to my
that's the
village.
level at which this should happen. All of this should be happening. Now, the next layer up is, in American terms, you'd call it the county. In Switzerland,
Hmm.
it's the canton. And it has its own little parliament. It has its own representative. Maybe the state level is a better example in the States, but it's the size of a county. In fact, it's not, most Swiss cantons wouldn't be as big as a US county, actually. Um, Certainly not in the South. And
That
look,
that reminds me of the joke about whoever if you look at the map of the United States and you just imagine like they just got this whole territory at once and they just gave a guy a marker and said, okay, cut this up into 50 equal states. Everyone knows that it was colonized from, east to west, but if you look at the map, it totally looks like some third grader started in the west and was like,
it does.
clearly there's
It does.
50, there's plenty of room. And then as he got closer to the right side,
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. Yeah, because you've got, you go Texas and all the way up that line. It's just colossal states, right? And
oh,
then
enormous.
you get over to the eastern side of that. Because I always talk about people in Ireland not understanding distances because we live on an island that's 350 kilometers long by 180 wide at its widest point. We completely fail to understand that we're basically a sandbar in the North Atlantic. So, we complain about the weather in Ireland. I was like, yeah, but you do understand we live on a glorified aircraft carrier. We basically have oceanic weather.
Hmm.
It's never going to get too cold. It's never going to get too hot. And it's going to rain a lot. Um,
Yep.
so when you try
Just
and,
pray the Gulf Stream never shuts off.
yeah, but you try and explain to them how big Texas is. And you're like, well, Ireland could fit into Texas 17 times. They can't even get that into their heads. There are counties in Texas that are the size of Ireland.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress.
The driving poem is the sun has riz, the sun has set, and here I is in Texas yet. That's when you're driving across the state. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so anybody outside of America doesn't get that Amarillo by morning is actually an aspirational thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's an aspirational statement. Genuinely is. That is a long way. That's where my brother-in-law's from.
Amarillo.
Yeah.
I haven't actually been there, but it was a good song. George Strait. Anyway, the point is, at the canton level, almost everything else that's relevant to you will be decided. And the politicians that you are electing are people who live on your street and you can bump into them. And you know what else? Most of them have got real jobs. So they live in the real world. A bit like aldermen in the States, or it used to be.
Hmm.
And then you have the federal government. And I have this fun game I play in Switzerland where I walk around asking Swiss people who the Swiss cabinet are. Who's the Swiss president? How many people in Switzerland, highly educated, informed country, do you think, when I ask, just a guess, and I appreciate that my sample is not big enough to make this authoritative, what percentage of Swiss people in Zug that I ask, who is the Swiss president, know the answer?
It should be a pretty high. I'd imagine it'd be a large number, like 90%.
I'd go near the opposite end of that because the reality was very low. It was shocking for me because, we're used to a system where you know who the president is, you know who the prime minister is, you know who the Taoiseach is, because they run everything, right?
Hmm.
In Switzerland, very few people give a shit who the federal government is made up of because it's irrelevant. They don't get to do anything apart from sit there and smile.
Hmm.
The federal government of Switzerland wants to make a big decision. What do they have to do? They have to go to the country to get a plebiscite. You want to buy an F-35? Mm-mm. That's a big budget number. You need to go to the Swiss people and ask them for permission to spend that money.
Hmm.
That's how it should be. That's what a democracy should be. But it's notable that in Switzerland, you don't have income tax in the same way that we have it in the US or Ireland or England. Forgive me, Britain. In Switzerland, if you're a Swiss person, you declare your taxes at the end of the year and you pay them at the end of the year, even if you work for a big company. That's still the truth. There's no PRSI, there's no PAYE. So the government has to ask you for your money, basically.
That's how it's ostensibly is still that way in the US, but it's a much weirder, that's gotten twisted out of shape by when I was younger. They'd started with like withholdings and then they'd put allotments on your check if you work for a large company that already like try to do that for you.
Uh-huh.
And then they would say, but this lets you get a tax return at the end of the year. Um,
Uh-huh.
but you get nothing for the value of having that money withheld that entire time.
Uh-huh.
Um, that has slowly evolved into this. That's now a way to invasively spy on payroll.
It's
It was
more than that. It's essentially allowing the organs of government to not just look on the payroll, but also to greatly increase spending on and lending on the basis that they have forecastable income flows.
right, which is like that's so opposite the plan. That's that's why we had this in the Constitution. Haha, that archaic. Um, assuming the U.S. still did follow the Constitution, which it doesn't anymore. Uh, the idea for discretionary spending on a large scale was pretty much restricted to the concept of if there was a major war, what would we do? Because the only spending, Congress is in charge of the purse strings, but all the literature around the formation of the Constitution was really about just maintenance of basic services for the government to even exist in case it was needed. But the whole idea was it generally wasn't. Um, in case you have to act as a unified whole during a war. That's why there's a standing navy thing because you can't spin that up from scratch,
Yeah.
things like that. Um, but aside from that, generally, if there was a war, we had to declare war because domestically, that would give the federal government powers that it would not normally have, such as discretionary spending, issuance of war bonds, and things like that, to cover the cost, as well as say, hey, temporarily we're going to go on some government guidance for the economy because output has to be directed towards the war because like that's what's happening right now. But that's obviously temporary. Now we're in this weird limbo thing where we're just perpetually at war, like all the time, undeclared, and we just keep the war economy, like which is literally a fascist economic model, just keep that going perpetually, and then paper it over with deficit spending that's funded unofficially by the Federal Reserve, doing stuff that kicks to the right people to make that spending show up where we want it and which just lowers everyone's dollar value. But we can export the inflation because hey, reserve currency, and it's a pretty poisoned system at this point.
Very. But you put your finger on the button again. You called it what it is. It's a fascist system. Fascism
Yeah,
is nationalist socialism that
yeah.
um you look at Germany in the 1930s, what did they do? They decided that certain companies were going to be the champions of Germany. And
Hmm.
so they stuck the entire German machinery behind them. So,
Yeah, yeah. People don't understand it. I think quite often, if you look at the political discourse, people don't get that fascism is a prescriptive. Uh, it's a political model that has a prescriptive economic model integral to it.
it's
Um,
another form of socialism. But what it does
yes.
is, in terms of the corporate, so I would actually argue. So I often talk about this whole thing around what's the difference between corporatism and capitalism. And I would argue that corporatism is derived from fascism. Hence, much like socialism, its brother, it ends up with the same outcome. The vast
Yes.
majority of people scraping an existence in the mud, whilst a small, self-appointed, self-anointed elite have all the wealth and all the
Well,
upside.
it's so primed for corruption being a state direction instead of, well, that's not socialism if the workers don't own the means of production or in the workers, meaning the state, because we is like the most we should do something slash the state should do.
Yeah.
We is the most abused word in that version of political rhetoric. But um,
Well, you'd know this coming from the services that we in a civilian context is a means of allocating allocating responsibility to nobody and
mhm.
allocating upside to everybody. It's nonsense,
Yeah,
but sorry, forgive me.
yeah, no, but that's the abuse of we sort of masks over this idea that um, the fascist model says the state is going to use the competitive concept to set up a state need, let mega companies compete over who's going to get the actual contract to be the state champion. And so the state's
But
picking the winner
crucially,
here.
they're going to determine who the competitors will be.
From the outset, yeah,
Right.
because they're going
Now,
to get development
how is
grants.
that different from a corporatist system? It's
No, it's
not.
exactly,
That's
and
the
that's
point.
the thing is like this is just set up.
What is
This
Bill
is like,
Gates trying to do? He's investing heavily in the creation of fake food. So why is
mhm.
he behind all of this agenda to stop people farming? Because that way he's got the fake food monopoly and he can sell everybody fake food and become a billion trillionaire.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like great crisis you got there. I've got a solution. Well, how did you know this was coming? I don't, I'm just a good guesser. Um,
Again,
yeah, again, after having lobbied for the problem for years.
it's like that joke I sent you about the old man going to the tax accountant. Did you
hmm
read it?
Which one?
All right, so I'll close out with a repeat of this joke because actually this is exactly what's happening. Um, a guy gets called into the tax office on the basis that he has all his
Oh, yeah,
income,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
all his income is from gambling, so he's
hmm
not made a tax return in 20 years. And so he goes in with his lawyer, and the guy from the IRS says to him, "Listen, you've been declaring that your only income source is gambling for pretty much your entire life. You haven't made one tax return in 20 years. That's got to be wrong." And he said, "Well, no, I'm just an incredible gambler. You, I make money every single day." And the guy said, "Well, um, sorry, I've lost the track of my thought there. What was it he got him to do first?" Oh, it doesn't matter. I've lost it. The point of it is, um,
Was it the, it wasn't, was it spitting first? Something gross, but
oh, oh, I know what it was. Yeah. So now it reminded me. Thank you. So the guy goes into the IRS. The IRS says, you've not done a tax return in 20 years. You can't possibly live off gambling. The old man says, "Well, listen, I'm a great gambler." And the guy says, "Well, show me." I said, "Okay, so um, I bet you I can bite my own eye."
oh,
And
right. Yeah,
and
right.
the IRS agent laughs and says, you just can't do that. That's wrong." So he pulls out his fake teeth and bites his eye. I think I said, "Oh, okay." He says, "Tell you what, double or quits. I'll bet you another 1,000 that I can bite my other eye without taking my teeth out this time." And the IRS agent says, "Okay, I'm on for that." So he pulls out his fake eye, sticks it between his teeth, and bites it, puts it back into the socket. And the IRS agent is sitting there dumbfounded. And, he's down a lot of money now. And the guy says, "I tell you what, double or quits one more time. I bet you I can stand at this end of your desk and pee in the waste paper basket at the other end of your desk without a drop touching your desk." And the IRS agent thinks about it and thinks, "Okay, I'm thousands of dollars down. There's simply no way that anybody, especially an old man, can achieve that arc to not have a drop land on my desk. It's impossible." So he says, "Okay, I'm up for that one." So the old man stands at the end of the desk and he pees all over the IRS agent's desk. And the IRS agent is dancing around the room saying, "I got $5,000. I got $5,000." And the attorney is holding his face in his hands, moaning. And the tax guy turns around and says, "What's wrong with you? He peed on my desk." He says, "I bet him $25,000 that he couldn't pee on your desk and have you jump around the room in delight about
Right. Yeah. Perfect.
it." Would be better if I'd actually remembered the joke at the beginning. But anyway, the thing of it is, all of these pieces are trying to misdirect us. And coming back to where we started with the ETFs, it's a massive redirection. It's a massive, it's not about giving people access to to the instrument because it has value. It's about passing the buck to the people. It's about making them into the bag holders. And it's doing that at a scale that no amount of advertising could have bought them before. No matter how many times Matt Damon told you that FTX was the sun, moon, and stars, it would not have had the same ability to distribute the contagion as an ETF for all of the reasons outlined and discussed.
Yeah, that which is wild. I didn't see that part of it until we had this conversation, which is why I wanted to ask you about this originally. Is like, what's what's really going on for the different players with this, and why is it such a big deal? Why is this being pumped so hard? It's
But also, why do we need to stand against it so firmly?
yeah. Well,
It's not,
that's clear now, but
yeah,
it's not clear to people what's going on with this.
no, but it damn well should be. Anyway, with that, it is certainly pushing the button for you, and I will see you in a few short hours for an investor pitch.
That's correct.
So
So, thanks a
it's
lot,
been
Greg.
fun.
This was interesting.
Thanks, my friend. Take care. Bye bye.
All right, bye.